Welcome back, everyone, to Lesser Known Operators. I'm your host, Nicholas Allen, and my guest today is Kevin Smith, also known as Terminator Training on Instagram. Kevin is a coach to future, current, and former SOF members, a hybrid athlete, also known as an average lifter, an average runner, content creator, and former Green Beret. I had the opportunity to work out with Kevin this past weekend, and he is neither an average lifter or an average runner. Great time with him. I love this episode. Got to nerd out about the fitness stuff, learn a few things I didn't know, and I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I do. Today's episode is brought to you by the Precision Wellness Group and Dr. Taylor Bosley. Precision Wellness Group helps you restore balance and unlock vitality through bioidentical hormone therapy, evidence-based, personalized telemedicine. Dr. Taylor Bosley is an emergency medicine physician, a U.S. Army veteran, and a former Green Beret. So what does that mean? That means Taylor knows where you've been, where you want to go, and how to get you there. And on top of things, he's an actual doctor who studies this subject intensely, HRT, TRT, hormone replacement therapy. If this is something that you've been thinking about for a while or just want to get some more information on, please reach out to Taylor Bosley and the Precision Wellness Group. He will point you in the right direction because he actually cares and actually wants you to feel your best self. I will have links to their website and social in the show description, along with Kevin Smith at Terminator Training. I really do appreciate you guys. Please remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, pass these episodes along. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show. Kevin Smith, welcome to Lesser Known Operators, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Nick. Looking forward to it.
First, you're probably going to be surprised what direction I go here, but the first thing that popped into my head is he's a fitness influencer with the last name Smith, and he has the most basic name. I was thinking about yours. Yeah.
James.
Exactly.
James Smith.
Yeah. Yep. And I was thinking about yours. I was like, man, it's tough to get into any industry with a last name Smith. It's got to be, right? Because it must be hard to search for you.
It is. And that's one of the main reasons, actually, that my business name is called Terminator Training Method, because I was thinking of business names originally. This is like way back a few years ago, even before I even got out. I was just doing this as a perspective side gig. And my wife and I were kind of trying to brainstorm names, and we couldn't really think of anything that might catch people's attention that had to do with my name, my basic name, Kevin Smith. And finally, as one of my nicknames when I was later in my career in group was the Terminator, and we can get into that later if you want. And I was like, why not do that? And I actually went to my team. I was like, what do you guys think? Should I name my business Terminator Training Method? And they're like, absolutely, 100%. Let's do that. So yes, very difficult to find. If you were to search Kevin Smith, probably the first guy that would come up would be the movie. I think he's a movie producer. He's got like a cult following, I think, like Jay and Silent Bob and all those movies like that. But I don't think my name would come up unless you typed in Terminator or Green Beret or something like that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the rest of the team. It's the complete opposite of, unfortunately, just a sea of names that you're going to fall into. And Terminator, that's going to set you apart. So you got to find something so yes, I agree with the teams there, and good on you. Cause I was like, yeah, that's perfect to get you away from Smith. Not that there's anything wrong with your name. It's just the internet's a fucking big place. So
yeah, for sure.
Now, you did a lot of cool shit in your career, blah, blah, blah. Who gives a shit? What I really want to know is, why does my deadlift suck? No.
Your deadlift?
Mine personally. I know you don't know anything about me, but no, I'm just kidding, man.
Okay.
You must get questions.
Because I could break that down pretty easily if you want.
No, I know why it sucks. Is because I've avoided it for so long.
That'll do it.
But just people give you random questions, right? How many times have you heard, what does it take to get through selection, or something the likes of that?
I get a lot of questions, and some of them are very non-contextual, just like that. And some of them are very contextual, and I appreciate high context questions. However, unfortunately, the more context that's in them and the more people that give me high context questions, like the less time and bandwidth I have to actually answer them. And I used to really do my very best to just answer every single person's question. Now that I've kind of grown a little bit recently, I can't quite get to everyone individually, which is why I try to make content as much as possible, just based on frequent questions that I get. But I have definitely heard what's it take to get through selection, and really not much more context than that several times. And it's like, well, where are you starting? Where you know where you need to go or where you want to go, but we got to kind of identify where you're starting. And are we talking about physical? Because everyone knows there's a, of course, non-negotiable physical component of being successful at selection. Like if you don't have that, you have no chance just to get in the door. But also there's the character component and the skill-based component, like doing land navigation, accomplishing the obstacle course, working together in a team environment. And those are all kind of a different beast. Of course, there's some overlap between all of them, but some people are, physical studs, but they get lost doing a pace count, like 100-meter pace count. That's obviously exaggeration, but, just to kind of like drive that point home. And some people are absolute studs. Maybe they're great at land nav, and then they get into a team environment and the wheels fall off. So yeah, I get that question quite often, and I kind of when I have the time to, and when I'm able to, I kind of help prod the person to give me some more details on what they're actually looking for.
Yeah, not to get too far off, but if you're 2 wickets off on a 100-meter pace count, you're going to get lost. You will get
Yeah.
lost pretty quick because
Oh yeah.
if you're dead reckoning, you're going to be way off.
Yep.
But it seems like in your content, you're answering the question with that has no context. It's such a broad question that's asked, and you're giving this fantastic answer for nobody asking a question. And sometimes you put in there of that, but it's derived from these questions that people are asking of trying to get information out of you, and they don't even really know why they're asking it because they'll see this. I have to get the selection, but there's a lot more to it. If you get selected and you go on, there's way more than just this after that. And you kind of learn that as well. So your answers seem well primed to not just get them through starting to train, maintaining, and then being ready on the execution day, but past that. And I really like what you write out there. It's like these are really well thought out posts that you're making with lots of information. So I amend you there. What's the driving behind that, or how did you come up with that?
Yeah. So I've always been very much obsessive about things that catch my attention. And I would say one of the earlier things that caught my attention was fitness. And just, I was a big athlete growing up. I grew up in Maine, so not a lot of competition. I was a pretty good player, but that's relatively speaking in the sports I played. I played stuck with football, basketball, and baseball in high school. And I had always kind of been preparing for those sports and learning how to work hard in order to like see results from that was kind of instilled by my dad. My dad was big into, hey, you don't have all of the genetic blessings to be good at these things, but if you work hard, then good things happen. And I then kind of eventually, a little bit later than I would have liked to, started to realize that if I put the effort in the gym and doing my conditioning, my strength work, then good things happen on the athletic field. And then over time, probably over a 2-year span of after I started to like really get the bug for training consistently, I started to realize I liked that more than the actual sports that I was playing. And honestly, like I wasn't athletic enough or gifted enough to go and play at any sort of high level. And so I just kind of started digging in big time to the nuances of fitness. Now, back then, there was not nearly as much information available as there is right now on open source or really anywhere.
We say
So,
back then, this is not that long ago.
right, it wasn't that long ago, but the technologically compared to now, it was almost nothing, especially in that soft realm. But even in general fitness, like you could go on bodybuilding.com, you could go and read Arnold's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, which I'm sure everyone who likes to lift has probably at least glanced at that book before. You could read the muscle magazines and get the insane bodybuilder workouts that are absolutely ridiculous, but everyone's got to try those once just to realize they're probably not going to work for them. And so basically since I ended up starting like getting into fitness at that younger age, probably about 15, I really haven't deviated much from it, even though of course I spent 12 years as a Green Beret. I still on the side was very obsessively trying to learn about stuff, reading books, listening to podcasts, reading articles from people I respected in the industry. And the thing about the going back to your question, the reason that I answer more vague questions, but I always try to include as much context as possible, is because what could be a perfect advice for one person could be the exact opposite advice that will work for another person. And a lot of people think like when people answer a question with "it depends," they are kind of trying to dodge the question. But when it comes to strength and conditioning, nutrition, performance, health, whatever you want to call it, it always depends. So if I just said "it depends" and stopped, that's one thing. But I always try to say what it depends on. And it depends on if this applies to you, or this might apply to you if you fit these criteria. This may not apply to you if you fit these criteria, and here's why. So I used to be actually a little bit more, I wouldn't say, I used to have almost a problem with including too much context, and I would just write and write and write, or talk and talk and talk. And my wife, as well as just over time, I've kind of learned that you can still provide context without just continuing to provide all these nuances and all these potential exceptions in a way that gets your point across. But still, I like to take the time to, if you look at my Instagram, most of my captions are very close to the character limit. If you listen to my podcast, usually I do mostly solo episodes, and usually they're Q&As from Instagram followers who ask me questions on my stories. And I usually talk to myself for anywhere between 70 to 90 minutes on most episodes. If I'm doing something more single topic where I'm just deep diving into something, it could be anywhere from like 45 minutes to 90 minutes. But I like to make sure I at least leave no stones unturned, at least from my perspective. So that's kind of the main reason I get really into the weeds with it.
Like what you said there, it depends, right? And this is one thing that's hard for people to realize. Like, okay, yeah, there's physical and health and like everything that you could see. But part of that, and this goes into the depends in the gym, is mental, especially with diet and consistency, right? Because people ask me, they're like, how did you get as big as you are? And what do you eat? It's like, listen here, this, what I do, there is no chance it is going to work for you because it is custom built by me, for everything going on in here. And that's like, I mean, I got all kinds of TBIs and all kinds of shit, and then like driven from getting medically retired early and all this other shit, right? It is not going to work for you. But I will tell you, and maybe you can form it to something that'll work for you. But nobody's going to be able to eat 2.5 pounds of beef every day and 2 cups of rice and get 8 hours of sleep and go to the gym 6 days a week, but not overtrain and push. Like, you can't, like, it's not going to work for you. Like, you have to get a professional to go with it, and you have to wrap your mind around, and you have to be able to articulate if they give you something and you're just not feeling it, like, say it's not working, something like that. Do you get that a lot too, where you give somebody something and they just cannot get into what you're trying to give them?
Yeah, I have worked and kind of checked myself quite a bit at trying to almost not dumb things down, but just simplify them to make them understandable for the layperson who doesn't really have. I just assume the person asking me a question, whether it's a client or someone in my DMs or maybe even in person, I just assume the person does not have any sort of like much of a fitness based knowledge. So I try without making them sound like an idiot. And sometimes I'll be like, I'm not trying to insult your intelligence with things, especially with like new clients. And I don't really know exactly how much they know or how much they even care about the details and the reason behind it and nerding out. Some of my clients are really, really into that stuff. Some of them just tell me what to do and I'll do it and I'll happily do it. And I'll just continue to be consistent what you tell me to do. So yeah, I have to definitely check myself to make sure I'm not trying to make other fitness professionals impressed with my knowledge, and make sure that even if I'm talking on an open source, like on my podcast or on your podcast or someone else's podcast, I have to assume that the audience listening is not much more than like baseline educated on the concepts that I'm talking about. And that definitely comes with practice and repetition and kind of checking yourself and maybe getting some feedback from other people. Like my wife enjoys training and she's a really good critic of mine. Like she gives me a lot of positive feedback as well as constructive criticism. And early on, she would be like, you sound really smart and you're really good at this, but also for some people, they just probably are not going to understand these things. So I check myself all the time and really try and work pretty hard to simplify things. Even if it's a very complex topic, it can always be simplified down. And I think a good sign of someone who is very well educated in really any subject is, especially if a good sign that they're a really good communicator, is that they can take a complex topic and simplify it in order for a mass audience to understand it. Or if it's a one-on-one conversation, kind of get to know how the person you are talking to thinks and what they are, what they react to, what their values are, whether they want to dive deep on something or not, and therefore, and then act accordingly from there, and make sure that you are not just completely going over their head.
Yeah. And let everybody know that you give a shit, right? Like I'm just working for you. But you brought up other fitness professionals and like trying to, what did you say? Like trying to,
So I could talk about a more complex subject in a room full of people who are also experts
okay.
on that subject, and I would talk differently than I would to a room full of people who are not experts on that subject, but they still want to implement something to improve their lives or improve their fitness or improve their run times, whatever it is. So I would talk differently in both of those scenarios, but I have to kind of check myself sometimes and remember that even though it makes sense to me in my head, this topic at a more complex level, but sometimes I have to kind of like break it down, use analogies, tell stories, use less scientific terms than maybe I would if I was talking to someone else who, was also an expert or really, really into the same thing that I was.
the internet's a terrible place. Because you're behind a keyboard and you can say kind of to some extent say whatever you want. And the fitness industry now it's up. There's a lot of hate in every industry, but I feel like the fitness industry's near the top because everybody's very quick to chime in and say, "Well, you're a fucking idiot." As fast as they can type it. Does any of your content that you're putting out, do you have that in the back of your mind, or you're just like, "Fuck them, I don't give a fuck. I'm teaching my way that I know the best that I know how."
Yes, I definitely do have certain things in the back of my mind. I definitely have an appreciation for the science and the data and what works in textbooks and what works on paper, what works in science experiments, but you'll probably notice that if you look at my content or listen to my content, most of it is a combination of what the science says, but more so anecdotal and experiential. Like, I know this works whether you can prove it in a study or not. I know it works because I've done it myself. I've done it with other people. I've helped other people do it. And even though you can't maybe prove it in a lab, guess what? We're not lab rats. So real life is different than a lab scenario. And you will get hate, especially as you, and I'm not like a big influencer or anything like that, but I have grown over the years. And the more I grow, the more those people from the grandstands are coming in to chime in with their 2 cents. And I do not not intentionally try and gain attention for making controversial statements and posts and content, but naturally some things are controversial, and I am a highly opinionated individual, not always with the exact subject of fitness, because I'll do other things like character building and just talk about discipline and just being a better overall well-rounded individual. And of course, some people are going to see that and they're not going to like it. But honestly, if you're trying to please everyone, then you're really just not going to please anyone is what I've been taught. And it kind of does make sense. Like, the reason I make content is for a very specific audience and a very specific type of person who has a very specific goal or mindset or outlook on life. And I'm not really trying to appease people that don't really have that same disposition in life. And so I'm okay with that. And honestly, it used to bother me a lot, especially when I first started getting periodic negative comments. And by the way, I do not get a lot of hate. Like, people who are bigger, have bigger platforms and have a lot more followers and a lot more views, they get way more hate than I do. So I'm not trying to say like everyone's a hater or anything like that, but you kind of do notice the hatred a little bit more so than the nice comments. And I appreciate when people support and they reach out and they say good things, or your program helped me, or this information helped me. But you always notice those negative ones. I call them keyboard Medal of Honor recipients. And over a time, I've kind of just gotten a little bit more used to it. And I have realized that at some point, if you want to get your word out there and you want to help people, you're just going to have to say what you have to say, even if that may piss somebody off, or maybe someone is out there having a really bad day and they're just trolling social media, looking for things to make them mad or get offended for or become a victim to. And you just kind of have to remind yourself, or at least I do, that those people probably have something going on in their life that is not great, and therefore they are, because they're behind the keyboard, like you said earlier, they are protected by the fact that they're behind the keyboard. They have the Instagram account that has no picture. They've got like one follower, no posts, and they follow 17,000 people. And usually there are some accounts like that that are cool, whatever. People just want to be on Instagram so they can consume content that they like. But most of the time, those content or those accounts are more so trolls, and they just are going to say whatever because they want to pick a fight and they want to be offended or be upset.
It it bothers me too when it gets so negative. I'm like, this is unhealthy. But I also do recognize the benefit and use it sometimes, as part of for the show. I don't vet anybody that wants to come on the show or that come on the show. I just let the internet do that. Like if you've got, your bio and your Instagram bio, that's our, and that's public. People would have already shredded you to fucking pieces for being a liar
Yeah.
already. To where it
Yeah.
gets to me, I'm like, and even if you get to me and you're a liar, I'm still gonna post that shit because the internet's gonna tear you down, and I'll be like, I don't give a fuck. Like this dude wanted to come on. It hasn't got to that point, but it's like it is a set of checks and balances to, like, also you can, if you say something and somebody has a valid point that changes your mind, that's valuable too,
Of course.
to where you
Absolutely.
think of something else. So there is benefit to some of that. Now, yes, as you said, some people are douchebags, just trolling the internet, just get in there and get under people's skin. But I've I got this new thing. It was bothering me last week, and now somebody will jump in with a stupid comment, and I'll just go on Google and I'll be like, how many goldfish are sold in America every year? And then I'll take the answer and then I'll put it as the response to their comment. And then what the fuck does that mean? It's like, I thought you were asking about goldfish, bro. So it just drives up
But yeah,
engagement for free. And I'm not being pulled down to their level. I'm having a different conversation. So that was just one funny thing that I developed lately to get around people being douchebags.
that's a great
But
technique, man. I haven't thought of that one. I usually just agree with them. So they're going to tell me something that I'm doing wrong, or they're going to tell me I'm an idiot, or they're going to tell me whatever. Like, I can't believe you're in charge of coaching people. And I say, yeah, I honestly can't either. I have no idea how anyone hires me or listens to me. It's crazy. I've just been faking this the entire time. One time, actually, this is kind of funny. One of my podcast episodes, it was basically a breakdown of my entire Q course from when I decided to join the Army until when I graduated the Q course. And I just kind of like went, it was basically a rundown of my experience in the Q course. And it got more views than most of my podcasts. It's kind of an older one. And one of the guys came on, or one of the commenters said, "We can tell that you're faking your voice, man. Just talk normally." And I, of course, like, this is how I talk for everyone I talk to, podcast, in person, whatever it is. So the very next episode, as a joke, I went on and started with like a super high pitch voice for the first sentence. And that definitely, I'm sure the guy who commented never saw any of my content ever again, but people got a kick out of that one.
yeah, never anything. But no, that's an interesting one. We know your voice. You're faking your voice. Okay, well, I don't. Okay, sure, bud. You
Yeah.
know,
I must be
or
really good at it because I do it 100% of the time.
last night somebody said something ridiculous, and I'm like, you're right. Oak trees can grow from 60 to 100 feet depending on which species of tree you were referring to. So, um, Anyway, you can use that one. I'm gonna go with you're right one. I've used that one as well.
Yeah, because I mean, if you're agreeing with them, there's nothing they can really argue after that. They're like, oh, well, how am I supposed to argue this then?
Yeah, you kind of shut people down in their argument and don't give them a leg to stand on. So you said that your fitness kind of you started noticing stuff in high school. Um, what was like a catalyst of it? Or were you just seeing, you wanted to perform, or were you seeing other people and comparing yourselves, or what was the inspiration at the onset to get to be as fit or strong or a best as good of a competitor as you could be?
Yeah, great question. I definitely drew some inspiration. I've always been into, and I'm not really built well for this. I don't really have the genetics for this in as much as like some people do, but I was always kind of almost like enthralled by like big jack bodybuilders and like, wow, that looks super freaking cool. But at the very same time, I was also very interested in like, I would sit and watch the Boston Marathon, like from start to finish. So I was also really into endurance. And if anyone's ever watched the Boston Marathon, literally it's the same clip the entire time. It's just a bunch of freaks of nature running really fast. It's not what most people would consider super entertaining, but I always was very intrigued by it.
Same
At,
level of dedication though from that
yeah,
bodybuilder or
yep.
that first, and those people that are running around a 2.5 hour marathon. It's the same level of fucking yeah.
Yeah. And
So
I would argue probably the marathon runners maybe have a little higher pain tolerance. The bodybuilders obviously have to go through their preps, and that's completely brutal. Of course, you're barely eating enough to
there's a lot
survive.
of rest. There's a lot of rest though in that of
Yeah.
recovery and things,
Yep.
whereas there's not as much. Yeah. So, but
120 miles a
debatable,
week, no joke.
debatable. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fucking
Yeah.
terrible. Oof.
And I did, like anyone, when you first start lifting, even if you're doing everything wrong, which I was doing everything wrong. Like I said, I was just following these incredibly high volume training programs that I would get from the bodybuilding magazines. Like those bodybuilders, for those who are not aware, there used to be magazines like Flex Magazine and some other like more hardcore bodybuilding magazines that would have certain high level bodybuilders training programs, their supposed training programs that they'd follow. And they were just insane, like 40 sets per muscle group per week, way, way too much. And I did not follow them to a T. When I first started, I was like any kid, just more into the show muscles and getting jacked and looking jacked. But at the same time, I realized that training lower body, doing some squats, doing some deadlifts, doing some cleans would transfer over pretty well to especially the football field. That was the main sport that I played where strength was an advantage. I was a running back in high school, and I started my high school career at like 140 pounds. And by the time I really got into lifting, probably the towards the end of my sophomore year, going into my junior year, and I really started to be consistent with it, you get those newbie gains, and it's really hard to, at least for me, it was really hard to stop. Like I probably did way more than I should have, just because you can really get away with a lot when you're first starting out, when you're young and you're just subject to these brand new newbie gains where you gain a bunch of muscle, gain a bunch of strength really, really quickly. Of course, that has an end to it, but it's really addicting and captivating when you first start. You're like, wow, I am literally seeing my body change every single week from just lifting weights. And throughout that entire time, also, I have always I didn't do, honestly, I didn't do any good, well structured running, but I would still go run. My dad was a big runner when I was growing up. He bikes now, but back then he used to run a lot. He would do road races, 5 milers, 10 milers, half marathons, things like that. So he would run quite often. And sometimes I would tag along with him. We didn't know what zone 2 was. We didn't know anything about like how to structure our runs. We would just go run. We would do some hill sprints. We would do some like fartlek runs where we'd go like hard for a couple mailboxes, easy for a couple of mailboxes, and so on and so forth, but never any sort of intensity modulation or anything like that. So I did not do it right. But I've always, like I said earlier, I've been just more genetically inclined to be better at endurance than strength. It takes me a lot of time and effort and dedication to put on any sort of muscle mass. And I can make running progress pretty quickly. Although now I am a little bit on the bigger side compared to what I used to be, definitely not compared to you. But my body probably likes to hang out around
I love you.
180,
180.
180-ish pounds. I'm 6'1", so 180 at 6'1" is pretty skinny. And that's like just genetic. I've got small joints, and I would consider myself more of like a ectomorph if we're going back to the somatotypes, which are, there's myths and a little bit of ambiguity around those. But I just started to see the fruits of my labor, even if that labor was not exactly how I would recommend someone get started training these days with what I know now. When you start seeing it happening and you start feeling the benefits, and then you start playing better on the field, and then you also start like filling out t-shirts, and I graduated high school at 190ish. That was before I got really, really into running, and I would later lose some of that weight, quite a bit of that weight, just because all I did basically from high school to when I went to selection almost was run and do calisthenics and circuit training and stuff like that, which is not very pro muscle. But yeah, it's kind of addicting, and it keeps you engaged, and especially when you just want to get even more behind the scenes, kind of get into the details of why all this stuff's happening, which happened to me. Like I said, I'm very obsessive. I like to know the why behind things, and it kind of just started there and hasn't stopped since.
Yeah, the newbie gains. But now, there is a right way to do it. And I'll see these kids at the gym. I'm like, well, if I help one, then I got to help the fucking all of them.
But
So
yeah,
keep your fucking mouth shut, Nick, and just throw around your big weights
so
and
hard.
just,
It's so hard.
um, but I'm like, God, these kids are like 18 and I was like, you guys are already strong. Here's what you got to do. Just,
Stop
you can
following
be
these
so
Instagram
you
influencers.
got you can be so far ahead of me by the time you're 10 years younger than me. And like, but I was like, okay, no, just keep your fucking mouth shut and just let them do their thing. They're gonna, these kids, they should know better because they've had a phone their whole life. They should know that I can find the right answer on the internet. So if
Yeah,
you're
they're
at the
just using the
gym
phone
doing,
incorrectly.
yeah, they are. They're looking
Yep.
at the wrong
Sam
stuff.
Sam
So
Sulek. Sam Sulek is, God bless him. He has an amazing YouTube account that he's built, and he's actually like a pretty entertaining dude to listen to and watch. But yeah, if you're just following what he does, if you're mimicking what he does, like, and you have great genetics, that's one thing. It may work really well for you. If not, which by default, most people don't have great genetics. Otherwise, they would just be average anyway. Then it may not work very well for you. But luckily, when you're that age, you can get away with a lot more. But then again, I always say this, just because you can get away with something does not mean it is the right path for you.
now I do like though Sam has proven, and this is to a point, it doesn't fucking matter what you eat really when you're younger. Like you're gonna be just fine. Like just get the basics right because Sam's eating fucking chicken nuggets and burgers from McDonald's and still getting the gains. Yeah, he's on some supplements and shit like that here. But if you listen to him talk, he's very knowledgeable about the
Yes.
subject and very
Yep.
pragmatic and things. So he does have good information, but then we get to that comparison thing. Like he's farther in the genetic side than I am. Like he
Yeah.
can
Oh, yeah.
put on the size. I have no problem putting on the muscle. I have problem, keeping the cardio in check and things like that. But he has no. Most people do. Most people can't do that. So he's just got this. He knows what he can do, what he's good at, and how he can put it effectively. But that comes with experience on these, kids. So I don't know, but everybody eventually is going to reach out. They're going to say, I need some help here. I am to the point. Like I've been thinking about it more and more. I'm like, how much more can I accomplish by myself? Like, like I've, I got the lifetime goal 6 months ago. Like, and now squat was last month. I was like, I never thought I would squat 5 plates, and now deadlift we're working towards 6, and that's like all of the things I never. I was like, okay, those I hope I get those in my lifetime, and now I'm like, well, what can I accomplish with somebody looking at it from a 30,000 foot view and pushing towards me? How important is it to realize that early? If you have goals like you want to accomplish, not at the professional, but maybe at the amateur level, or just longevity wise and being healthy, how important is it to realize that early that somebody else is going to be able to help you more than you're probably going to be able to help yourself?
Yeah, this is huge. I would say, even if you think you know exactly what you're doing, and what you're doing right now is working really well, no matter what, if you're doing things yourself, there's going to be a bias. There's going to be a component of bias. For example, I just prepped for an ultra marathon that was supposed to happen in April. And I consider myself a really good coach to other people. However, because I'm biased and because I really enjoy running and I really don't enjoy cross training, sitting on a bike, sitting on a rower, doing the things that will still allow me to progress my running, but also not in an impactful way. So I can actually like recover from the impact and the eccentric component of running. And so what did I do? I coached myself and I ended up hurting myself because I didn't listen to my body the way I should have. I also programmed for myself. So I program naturally things that I enjoy and things I'm good at instead of things that I need. And usually you can do things that you're good at quite often. And as long as you have a little bit of things you need to do, even if you don't enjoy them. So, for example, in that example, cross training, and you're going to be fine. But if you kind of don't have that, like you said, 30,000 foot view outside looking in, hey, man, I don't care about your ego or your feelings. I care about helping you as a coach. That is super valuable. And I would say, yes, finding that early, and it doesn't matter how skilled you are. Like I said, like even if you think you have it all figured out, still having an unbiased opinion to help come in and help you and give you some guidance and tell you to do things even if you don't want to do them is huge. The earlier you can do that, the better. You can, like I said, get away with a lot of things, a lot of dumb stuff. I did, and a lot of people do when they're younger, but eventually you're going to run into either one of two things. You're going to hurt yourself and you're going to have to take a hiatus from doing something you really love doing and figure out a way to come back and hopefully not hurt yourself the next time. Or you're going to have to swallow your ego and be like, you know what? I want to avoid that. I want to avoid learning from that experience. I think it's beneficial really for everyone to get some small injuries throughout their training. Like if you're going to train hard, even if you do have a really good coach and even if you do everything right, you're still going to get banged up once in a while. And I think that's valuable. It just teaches you good lessons. But some people just continue to do something, whether it's way, way wrong or mostly right, but a little bit wrong. And, you know, their shoulders always talking to them or their hips always talking to them or their knees are always talking to them when they could just have someone help them maybe with some exercise selection or help them clean up their technique. Or a big, big problem is just guys do way, way too much volume. And if you learn how to train a little bit harder and get more out of your training, you won't need quite as much volume. It'll take less time. It'll be less fatiguing. It'll bang you up less, and you'll still get just as much, if not more, of the results you're after. And having an outside eye on that can be massive. It is tough, of course, to vet people and find the right coach, especially if you have more niche goals. For example, like I coach a pretty niche area. I coach guys prepping for selection. And there are definitely other great coaches out there that do the same thing, but just not a lot of them. And I will say, and I'm not going to name any names or talk specifically or anything like that, but a lot of guys will get out, whether they're SEALs or Green Berets or whatever they did in the past, Rangers, and they enjoy the fitness component. They maybe themselves were like super fit and high performing, but they don't have the education to back it up, but they do have what people think is the credentials to back it up, which is I used to do this. I used to be a Green Beret. I used to be a Ranger, but they don't actually have the experience working with people or they haven't educated themselves enough. Like I don't have a lot of credentials. Like on paper, I'm pretty low credentialed when it comes to fitness, but I do think that most of the information I put out, if you listen to several podcasts or if you followed me, you'd probably never guess that because that's kind of my goal is to make it so that even though I don't have all these well-known credentials, like I couldn't get hired in a commercial gym right now because I don't have any nationally accredited certifications, but I do know that I could still go in there and help someone. But because I work for myself, doesn't really matter. Not once ever has a client asked like, what are your credentials? I do a bunch of like niche, very, very niche, not very well-known courses. Those are usually a lot more beneficial and a lot more fruitful. You get more out of those, at least in my experience. But yeah, I think it's huge. And if you can swallow your pride, swallow your ego, or if you just want to get there faster, that's another thing. Like if you think of all the best athletes of all times, all of them have coaches. I'm not just talking about the head coach of their team. I'm talking about like their personal coaches. They'll have like a life coach or they'll have a personal trainer or something like that to just show them the way. And these guys are the best of the best of the best. And they have all the gifts, the natural genetic gifts, but they still know. Of course, they have money. They've got the resources to hire really good coaches, but they know that in order to get there as best they can and as painlessly as possible, that having a professional help them is the way. So that's my take on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you said not doing too much. I did an 8-set chest workout yesterday and I was smoked. Like
Yeah.
that was it. I mean, it's very
Yeah.
heavy. It was very
Probably because you train hard.
it was hard.
Yep.
And I was like, I'm fucking done. I was like, because usually I'll throw in farmer's carries. I'm like, I'm fucking smoked. Like, let's get the fuck out of here. But yeah, those certifications are fucking bullshit, right? Because I'm walking around the gym and they got the TV up there with the trainers, and I'm watching the trainer train somebody, and I'm like, that's not fucking right.
No,
And I
it's
go over and
bad.
look at the TV. I was like, no, that's 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 not correct. Whatever they're teaching in this letter acronym certification is not being translated to this person here.
Yeah,
So
that's the thing too, is like those big accreditations, they cover all the basics, but they don't cover how to put it all together into a program, into a long-term program. I have yet to, other than the niche ones that I was talking about earlier, we can get into that offline if you want. I have not learned from any sort of like main certification. And I've looked at these. I haven't actually done them through, but I've seen them. They don't talk at all about like how to program. And programming, by the way, is yes, you have to know the basics. You have to know general exercise execution. You have to know biomechanics and rep ranges and things like that. But putting it all together in a program only comes through, of course, seeing other people's really good programs, following them yourself. I probably own well over 100 programs from people I respect, and you learn a lot doing that. But also programming for yourself, programming for other people, lots and lots of other people with lots of different goals, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, trimming the fat, making small changes over time. And you really only learn that by doing, not necessarily by getting a course where you get to hang a certification on your wall or something like that. So,
yeah. Now, clear anything up there if anybody listening. I try not to hate on anybody who's already in the gym. They're fucking doing way more
yes,
than the people that don't
for
go to the
sure.
gym. They're already there. The only time I will say something, I'll go, hey, you're gonna fucking hurt yourself here. Can I show you how to not have this shoulder pain that I have real quick? And if they like, no, I got it, then I fuck off. But
Same.
that's when
Yeah.
I step in. I'm like, hey, kids, trust me here. This is going to hurt for the rest of your life if you keep doing it like that.
It's
Maybe
funny you
not at
say
that
that.
weight, but when you go up in
Yeah.
weight, it's going to fucking hurt.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. That is my one thing that where I'll step into. I would love nothing more to go up to, a high school kid who looks like he really wants it and is working hard. Like you said, like I've very much commend anyone doing that. And I would love to go up and just give him some advice. But the only time I actually do that is when someone's about to hurt themselves. And funny enough, this is probably about 6 months ago now, but there was a guy on the pendulum squat at my gym, and it's an Arsenal pendulum squat. And so if you look at the machine almost like you look at a leg press or even a hack squat, you'd think, oh, I could probably put a couple plates on each side and I'll be good. So that's what he did. He put 2 plates on each side of the pendulum squat. For reference, I'm not the heaviest squatter of all time, but for reference, like my 5 rep max on that machine is 3 plates total. So 2 plates on one side, 1 plate on the other side. It's all the same loading spot. So you don't have to load it the same on each side. And I can get 5. And this kid was a high school kid, maybe 150 pounds. And he didn't do a single warm up anything. And I ran over because I knew he was going to bury himself. And you don't want to get buried on that machine. And I was like, dude, you should probably take all that weight off and do a couple sets just to get a feel for it first. So yeah, that's the one time I'll step in is when someone's about to really hurt themselves or make a big time fool out of themselves or both.
That's funny you say that one because I hadn't encountered one of those machines before. And I was like, all right, well, it's got to be like because there was no leg press there. I was like, okay. So I threw 4 plates on there and I did one. I was like, and I was with somebody. We were just working out together. I'm like, fuck, now I got to get to at least 5. And that was pretty fucking hard.
Yeah. Yeah. They're brutal. They're brutal. the resistance profile on them is not like a leg press or a hack squat.
No, it's completely different. I was like, okay, now, okay, let me look at the rest of the stuff. We're going to start at 0 here, and we're going to go up from there like we do on everything else. We're not just going to jump to it. But yeah, I go to leg press. I start at 4. That's the first set is 4 on each side. And who was I talking to the other day? And it's just something like, and they're like, because I'll max the leg press out, and I'll go, man, I don't know, because it feels the same at like 8 on each side or 12 on each side. I'm like, am I fucking doing anything here? That's a good question for you. Like, what am I doing with leg press? Like, am I really getting the benefit I think I'm getting out of leg press than I am getting it with, because I know what I'm getting out of barbell squat. But like, what really am I getting out of that heavy, heavy, heavy um,
Leg press.
leg press? Yeah.
Yeah, so excellent question. And this is a little bit machine dependent, but I'll talk leg press specifically, and we'll just talk about machine squats versus barbell squats or free weight squats. So a leg press, you can do a lot with a leg press. You know how you can make a squat more quad biased by putting your feet a little closer, driving your knees out over your toes, maybe putting some elevation under your heels, and that makes it just more quad dominant. Whereas if you do more of like a powerlifting squat, wider stance, you kind of sit back like, powerlifters do, you're going to be way stronger in the squat, but it's going to be more of a glute slash hip dominant squat. Leg press, you can do the same. And a lot of it has to do with not all leg presses are created equal. Some of them are a lot nicer than other ones. But if you put your feet kind of higher up on the pad, it's going to be a little bit more glute dominant. And also, if you have a leg press with a adjustable back pad, if you have it more up, like closer to vertical, it's going to be more glute dominant. It just puts you more in hip flexion. Whereas if you have it further back, it puts you less in hip flexion. And then if you put your feet a little bit lower on the pad, it will allow you to drive your knees further out over your toes. Of course, there's a mobility component. There's, are you wearing heeled shoes or are you wearing regular shoes? What's your ankle mobility look like? And so on and so forth. And the main difference between a leg press and a squat, both well executed, we're assuming both well executed, is that the leg press is very low axial load. So it's not loading your spine. So that's not always a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. And a lot of people, especially if you're just not built well for back squats or barbell squats in general, or if you just don't execute it right, like you're not very skilled in the movement, it takes a lot more skill to do a back squat or any free weight squat than it takes to sit on a leg press, which is why usually like newer lifters will go and use the leg press. You can put more weight on it. But generally, for a lot of people, the point of failure or the reason they're going to fail on a back squat isn't always their legs. It's rarely their legs. Usually it's your core or your lower back or something like that. Usually you can squat that weight up, but because your core is breaking down or because you're not bracing properly or just because maybe your lower back's grinding a little bit, oftentimes people will fail at the bottom of a squat because of their core and not the actual legs, which again is not a good thing or a bad thing. It just kind of depends on what you're going for. If you're going for example, maximum hypertrophy or leg muscle gains, you want the point of failure to be your legs. And using a machine almost makes that, it makes it almost impossible for anything besides your legs to be the point of failure. Whereas if you are built really, really well for squats, so you got like short legs, short femur, you get to the bottom of the squat and your calves are just resting on your hamstrings, or your hamstrings are resting on your calves, super deep, and your back is basically straight up. You're not really bent over. Like if you watch me do a low bar squat, I'd be more bent over just because I have really long femurs. Then maybe the squat's an excellent movement for you for like growing the quads, because chances are legs might be the point of failure. And you don't have to train everything to failure. Of course, you want to get pretty close. Whereas if you're on a leg press, no matter what, if you're going to fail that, it's in almost every case going to be because your legs can't push it up. And also the leg press, like I said, axial load. A lot of people think leg press is like 0 axial load. There's still a little bit. Your spine is still bending there at the bottom, especially if you go really deep, but it's less so. You're less likely to hurt your back or something like that on a leg press. Definitely not impossible, but less so. But other machine squats are similar. Like the belt squat, for example, that is one of the few really loadable squats. You can load a belt squat super heavy and there's no axial load because the belt's just kind of down around your hips. And that can be a really good thing, especially if you have back issues or if you're like me and you're just not built very well for back squats. I don't back squat anymore. I used to do it a lot. And I got it, pretty commendable. I was like 450 at 185 pounds, but I just don't do it anymore because I'm not built well for it. And now my goals are to like feel good and grow my legs because I have genetically very skinny legs and I have to put a lot. My legs have to be the point of failure on a lift that I'm doing, and they just never were on a squat. So I will favor belt squats. I'll favor pendulum squats. I used to do a bunch of hack squatting. The hack squat at my gym in particular is not my favorite. It's just not built very well for me in particular. But if I see a nice hack squat at some other gym, then I'll definitely hop on it. They're great. And those are like partially axial loaded so that you get a little bit of spinal loading, but it's a little bit less so. And one thing that people kind of overlook about spinal loading, axial loading, anything that loads your spine. So it could be a front squat, a back squat, it could be a hinge, anything like that with a barbell or a machine, certain machines like a Smith machine, is that's kind of a different source of fatigue. So you have like your local muscle fatigue, your legs fatigue, you have like your cardiovascular system, so systemic fatigue after a set and even between training sessions. And then the more you load your spine, it's what's called axial fatigue. So spinal loading, it just adds more fatigue to your training, which again, I am not anti-fatigue. Like fatigue is a very, very acceptable byproduct of training, but it just depends on what you're going for. The goal for most people, unless of course you are a power lifter or someone who has to use a barbell for the squat, bench, deadlift for your sport, like there's no arguing that. But the goal for most people should be to find lifts that give them a really good stimulus, but don't just beat the hell out of them. Whether they're beating the hell out of their joints, like you get finished with a set of back squats, and if all you felt was your knee joints and your lower back and you didn't feel your quads, you're still probably going to get some quad stimulus from it, but it's still probably not the best option for you compared to all of the other potential options out there. And most people will kind of argue the difference between free weights versus machines. And I still use free weights for a lot of exercises. I'm not just a machine only or free weight guy, but people will argue like free weights are more functional and they'll make you more athletic and so on and so forth. And I think it's very important. If I had a newer lifter who's just starting, I would start them mostly with free weights, if not all free weights, because I think it's super important to learn those movement patterns. They're higher skill, and the skill component of lifting, like if you can do a really nice barbell squat, you're going to be able to do a really nice leg press or hack squat. It's like almost like cheating for you because it's just providing all the external stability. You don't have to do it yourself. But there's recent data, somewhat recent data that shows that whether you use free weights or a machine kind of is person dependent, but it won't, like if you just mostly use machines, you're not going to become some unathletic, unable to perform individual. And a lot of times, especially for like older, more banged up guys, especially SF guys that have just been grinding barbell lifts their entire lives, and they're just kind of still in that anti-machine purist mindset, which believe me, I was in for a lot of my career. It just pains me to see a little bit because there's so many other options out there to get that stimulus that you're after, minus all the fatigue and or joint pain and or feeling like shit for a couple days afterwards because you're just married to this specific lift. So jumped around there a little bit, but that's kind of the difference between those two machines, a barbell squat versus a leg press, and kind of machines in general.
I know we got a bit off of like about you, but as I was listening to you, I wanted to ask a question that kind of drove home the fact that, we said the certifications and all this and all that, but I wanted to ask you a question that I knew you would go deep into to show without you actually saying how much you know, me getting you to show how much you actually know about what you're talking about. So that's what is kind of behind that there. That was a great answer. All the information, and different things. So that broke that down really well. And you said recovery and fatigue, right? Or no, you said fatigue, and then if you're fatiguing multiple parts of your body, that just increases the amount that you have to recover. So if you're not hitting extra body parts that are getting tired, but you're not seeing any growth out of, you're just increasing the time that it takes you to recover from these exercises, and you're not able to maybe your workouts the next day or 2 days later. Well, you're still tired from this one, where you could have been had you been targeting that. And that gets back into a coach, right? Of
Right.
being like, oh,
Yeah.
they're going to be able to see it when you're not, like, and things like that, and get there faster. But there's nothing wrong with
Especially,
machines. Yeah.
no, no, there's nothing wrong. And especially when you're also, by the way, throwing conditioning into the mix, because you
Yeah.
got to factor that in too. If you're following a 6 day per week push pull leg split and also trying to run 5, 6 days a week, it's just going to be a fatigue fest, I call it. And that's not really what you want. You got to try and find a way to trim the fat so that you're getting the stimulus you need for growth towards your goal, but also, like you said, able to recover. And the volume you were talking about is commonly referred to as junk volume. It's basically
There
volume
we go, chunk.
that
Yeah.
is still going to fatigue you, still going to provide that wear and tear on your joints, and still going to require you to get mentally engaged. That's another form of fatigue, is mental fatigue, especially if you're doing, you know, if you're about to go do a set of squats close to failure, like that's an anxiety producing thing. And if you can get the same stimulus, or you can get the just as much out of doing fewer sets of that, just for a mental fatigue reason, like getting ramped up for, like you said, 8 sets. You did 8 sets of a chest. You did 8 sets of chest yesterday. If you did 16, that's another 8 more time, which is very common, by the way. People will do 16 plus sets of a single muscle group in one workout. And that's another 8 more times that you have to get mentally focused and ramped up for a set, feel a little anxiety, and so on and so forth. Not that chest exercises usually don't cause a ton of anxiety, but just the similar concept.
Yeah. Um, yeah. You know, I found I got to a point, and now the weight's kind of, heavy for me, where I'm like having to pull back. I'm at like 24 to 30 sets a week of strength, but I'm at 3 days of conditioning. So there's 1,000 meters to 1,500 meters in the pool, and then I'm on the treadmill. So we're alternating days. So I'm like, got to pull back, and that's, again, we get back to the coach. But last one before we wrap that up and go to something else is, Dorian Yates says there's nothing wrong with machines. So if Dorian Yates says it, I fucking believe it.
100%. Absolute legend.
Yeah. He's so, I listen to his stuff. I'm like, man, what a fucking, just great. If somebody didn't want to pay anybody and you just listen to Dorian Yates, you'll probably
Yeah.
get farther ahead of most of your peers. I think his information is so good. And that's what I've been using a lot, is stuff he'll say. So that's what him saying that caused me to pull back on my workouts and be like, I'm
Yep.
doing too much.
That's the
So
thing, is he was very well known for his very high intensity, lower volume training. And his training sessions would take 45 minutes to 60, and he would only train what, 3 or 4 days a week.
3 days a week
And
is what he
and
said.
look
Yeah.
and just look at him. He's an absolute savage.
And he was working a full-time job too. The first 2 times he won Olympia, just like Coleman was,
Yep.
Coleman was still a cop when he was
Yep.
working, so, which was kind of ridiculous, but he looked
Crazy.
ridiculous. Um, all right. So obviously you've got a very specific section of the population that want to go do a very specific job, and it's very stringent of get into. Um, how do you do you have it has it changed as the population has changed, or years have gone by, because you've been doing this a few years, that kids are a little further away, that what I've got going on here is not the ideal body size or weight to be going through the Q course, to go through, because you're just going to be fighting against yourself as you get there. There's points in the course where it's okay, or when you get to group, but towards the beginning, middle, and until you get to language, it's not ideal. Are you
I
fighting against that
100%. Yeah.
still?
A little bit. I would say in general, guys who come to me are a little bit more already developed strength wise, and they need more work on the endurance. And I always say this, I may sound like a broken record for people who listen to my podcast, but selection is an endurance event with a strength component, not the other way around. If you are super duper strong, you can lift every weight in the gym and you're stronger than all your peers, but your borderline endurance, you have a way lower chance of making it through selection itself. If you are a running beast, you're an absolute freak, running, rucking, etc. Of course, there's a strength component to rucking. and you're maybe a little borderline on the strength, but you're not like crazy weak. You're just, just kind of middle of the pack, maybe even a little bit below the middle of the pack. You have a much better chance of making it. That was kind of me when I went through. So I do think guys over index in general the lifting and the strength, especially just certain lifts, like getting very dogmatic about doing these specific lifts. The only lifts you have to do, I say this all the time too, the only lifts you actually have to do are carries, hand release push-ups at this point, pull-ups, a plank, running, and rucking. That's pretty much the only things you have to do. The movement patterns, so the squat, the hinge, the push, the pull, vertical and horizontal of each of those are very important. You want to be strong in those movement patterns, but what you choose for a tool to do those movement patterns is largely up to you. There's no powerlifting competition at selection. There's no max clean and press competition. So, if you don't feel very good when you do barbell deadlifts off the floor, maybe you're not built well for it or whatever, guess what? You can do a RDL or a stiff legged deadlift or a single leg RDL or a good morning or a 45-degree back raise, any number of things. If you don't love a bench press because it jacks your shoulders up, or you find that it's more of a tricep lift for you, which is the case for me, I've got long limbs and I've never really enjoyed bench press. I've always kind of sucked at it. You can do a dumbbell press. You can do deficit push-ups. You can use a machine, God forbid, and you're going to be totally fine so long as you're getting stronger and stronger. I'll see a lot of this kind of comes from Reddit, but I'll see a lot of these people that go on Reddit. You talked earlier about not having credentials and just being able to say whatever you want. Well, Reddit is literally a panacea of that. And guys will say, oh, make sure you're squatting, benching, deadlifting this. Make sure you're doing, I saw one guy say, you need to be able to power clean at least 315. Like, there are not a lot of people in the world that can power clean 315, let alone every single person who gets selected in each class, which probably is average like 100 guys. Like, I would say maybe less than 3 on
I don't
average
know if
can power clean
anybody. I don't.
315.
I I think in my graduating class I would have been the only person who could have done that. Like
Right.
that,
Yeah.
and I don't even. That's questionable, even and saying that, but that's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's a troll.
Yeah. So I would say in general, most guys need more work on their endurance, and getting guys to buy into that, honestly, even though endurance work, especially when you first start out and you're doing it right, which I make sure when guys start working with me, they're doing it right. It's boring. You run mostly slow. You do some little pickups, some strides, but you're not going out Monday, first day of the training program, and knocking out 12 400s. You're not doing some crazy long tempo run or fartlek run. You're doing mostly easy running to kind of build that base. And you're doing some cross training, and you're doing enough lifting to either get stronger if you need to get stronger, or maintain your strength if you're already strong enough. And I can usually deem someone whether they're strong enough or whether they need to work on it just by my assessment the very first week. And usually it is a cut down from what they've been doing. So most of my guys, when they start working with me, they're lifting 3 days per week. No more, no less. Some guys occasionally 4 if they're already kind of pretty good at running and they need a little bit more strength. But I even think that any more than 4 days per week, especially when you're also doing conditioning, is just kind of needless. If you can't make gains and progress on 4 days per week, like, there is something that you're doing, whether it's in the gym or outside the gym, which of course I have the in the gym part covered because I'm programming for them, but there's something missing. Like, you absolutely can. Some of the strongest, most of the strongest human beings in the world, power lifters, strongmen, they lift weights 3 to 4 times per week, most of them, because that recovery component is massive. And all they care about is getting strong and jacked. It's not like they're doing a ton of conditioning on the side either, although strongman guys do have to be pretty well conditioned. But yeah, that one is a little bit tough, but I wouldn't say it's too much, especially once you get guys going and you can show them the benefits. They start to realize that they're starting to feel better. Their resting heart rate's going down. They're able to run longer. They're able to run faster. Even if they're going easy, they're still increasing their easy run pace, which is not really that important for your top end speed, but it is a good sign that you're doing something right, especially if you're not also doing time trials and faster running and things like that. But I have had probably at least a couple handfuls of guys who, when they first start working with me, they are not big fans of running. They don't really run much. And by the 8 to 12 week mark, they actually admit, like, I don't love running, but I actually kind of look forward to running now, which I never thought I'd say. And it's like, well, when you do it right, even though it's not super fun every single time, you feel a lot better that way. You feel way less banged up. You feel way less under recovered and overworked. And yeah, of course, you're going to like it a little bit more. You may not love it ever, but you're going to not hate it like you used to when you used to do it improperly.
Yeah, I today in the pool, it's like, you know, I kind of like swimming now in the pool. Uh, have a joke. I'm like, yeah, I get a check on the first of every month, and I'm afraid of the ocean. Still, like, still don't want to go in the ocean. Don't like the open water. But as like a fuck you to how I got hurt, I'm in the pool every other day swimming.
Good for
So
you.
I'm pretty capable now, and it's like a I don't know, fucking therapy thing now, and I'm better at it. It's helped in
Yep.
my running as well.
Yeah.
But you know, you got out and you saw this hole in the market, and then you filled it, and now you're doing really well in it. Take me back to how we all got started with this. What drug you into the recruiter's office to start this whole journey?
Yeah. So I was a lost 21-year-old kid. Long story short, I tried college a couple times, and the kind of saying, like, I gave something a college try. Well, I gave college a college try twice. Basically, you give something a try, but you're really not actually giving it a try. You're just kind of checking the block, because honestly, the reason I did it is because all my friends were going to college. I grew up in a pretty well off town. My family wasn't really that well off, but the people around me were. So it was very much like, oh, my son's going to Yale. My son's going to Harvard. My son's going to what? Princeton. And I didn't go to any of those schools. My grades were not that good, but basically everyone was going to college. And so that's why I did it. And it did not work out. I dropped out after a couple of weeks, my first try, and I made it a whole entire semester, my second try. And I honestly just did not feel like I was in the right place at all. I didn't feel like I gelled with the people. I didn't feel like I had the same disposition or mindset or way of life as most of the people I was hanging out with, who just, go out and party. Don't get me wrong, I did my fair share of partying back then, but I honestly had like very little to no purpose, and I just wanted to find my purpose. And so after I dropped out that second time, I was kind of, the internet wasn't much of a thing like we were talking about earlier, but it was still enough of a thing where you could start reading about certain things. You could Google, hard jobs or
What year
Army
is this?
Rangers. This was 2012, 2011. 2011 is when I initially joined, and I came across a Ranger contract, and I came across the Army Rangers and realized that you could sign a Ranger contract and get a chance to go straight into RASP. And like, I think it was called RASP already. It was either that or RIP still. And turns out, whether this was true or not, I don't know. The recruiter said they don't have any RASP contracts, but we do have 18 X-ray contracts. So SF contracts, basically civilian all the way through. I'm sure most of your listeners know what that is. And I went home and pretty much spent the next week. Of course, like I said, I'm obsessively researching it. I watched 2 Weeks in Hell probably like 5 times, and I'm like, this is what I need to do to actually prove to myself. And to be honest, like, I cared a lot more about what other people thought about me than I do now. So I was trying to prove to other people
We
that
all
I'm not a
we all
complete piece
do.
of shit.
And
Yeah.
people that say they don't care about what other people think, they're fucking lying. To some extent, we all do. Otherwise, we wouldn't be a good example or be so that's all bullshit. Go ahead.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I wanted to kind of prove to other people and myself that I wasn't a piece of shit, and that I could actually stick to something and do something. And I felt like very much drawn to it. Like, I've never been drawn to anything in my life. So a lot of people have these like really deep and complicated whys as to why they joined. And for me, honestly, it was just to go do something hard and be a part of something that challenged me and tested my mettle and was something that was a little bit bigger than or to a lot bigger than myself. And so that's what I did. So that was 2011. About 5 months later, I was off to OSIT, and that was the beginning of the journey. Went through the Q course. So I started in July of 2018 because of 2011, because I was a Delta and I went straight through. I went through selection. I went through
When'd you go?
SOPSI.
When'd you do selection?
I did selection in February of 2012.
I was there in January of 12.
Okay, I was at SOPSI when you were at selection
Yeah, I
then.
was the
So
first. I was the first. That was the first time I went. So yeah. So we were similar times. Yeah.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. I remember it not being too bad weather-wise recently since I live 30 minutes from McCall right now, and
Oh, solid.
this winter was pretty brutal as far as being cold. It's usually not that bad, and it wasn't that bad when I went through. I actually prefer doing those rucks and land nav and all that stuff in cooler weather rather than the heat. And so went through, got 18 Delta. It was not my first choice. It was actually my third choice, but they made me a Delta. I guess my GT score was higher than what I don't know. They gave me Delta, and I wasn't like super pumped about it. I was pumped that I got selected, and I was like, screw it, I'll just go try it. Why not? And went through. The first thing I did in the Q course was SOCM. So SOCM is basically the main reason that the Q course is so long for medics is because you start with SOCM. You do the entire Q course like everyone else does, and by the way, that's stands for Special Operations Combat Medic Course, and that's an additional 9 months, and then you start the Q course. I don't know what the order is; they always change it up, so it might be a different order at this point. But back
Sockham's
then, it
still
was SOCM
first.
first. Yeah,
Still first. Yeah, because there's
yeah,
nowhere else to put it.
yep.
So yeah, still first. But no, that's yeah. So you would have graduated at the end of 13.
No, I graduated. I went straight through. I didn't recycle anything, and I ended up graduating in July 31st of 2014.
Okay.
So I was the July 2014 class.
Okay. I was October 23rd of 14. I graduated. Yeah, so it's a couple
Okay.
months after you. So we were
Yep.
in language at the same time. It's
Yep.
interesting, tangent here. It's very cool because now I'm doing these. I get to see. It's like, oh, you were there at this time. Do you know this person and
Yeah.
that and things like that? You remember this or this person said that. So that's been one cool thing that's really been coming out of the show is networking and meeting all the guys that we all went through this same crazy shit together. And it's like, you know, because we get to group and it's all discounted, right? Because everybody's a bad mother. Everybody's got a special forces tab or a ranger tab or a fucking dive bubble or all this shit, and it's not cool anymore. And it's just normalized. But it is cool. Like we got out, we did all this cool shit, and it's like cool to run into the people that you were there with that you never thought
Yeah.
you'd see again,
Yeah.
or somebody said something and you're like, did that actually happen? And then you run into somebody and say, hey, remember this speech that sergeant major gave? Like, yeah, I remember
Yeah.
that shit. So it is interesting and fun to the side of that. But
I'm
no,
sure we've been formed up on the same basketball court plenty of times just without
remember that.
knowing it.
Well, okay, I mean, here's one. Remember that fucking drug test we had to come in for at
Oh, yeah.
like 2 a.m. and then
Yep.
we didn't even get drug tested. We just kept going down the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. That
Crazy.
was like, what the fuck are we doing out here? Or how about the one where the 82nd dudes like sexually assaulted that
Oh,
girl and
yep.
threw her in the barracks
Yep.
of the SOPS, was it SOPSI or
I think it was a super hooch.
yes, they threw her in the hallway there and left her.
And of course, we got in
And
trouble.
you guys got all formed up, and
Yeah.
I'm living off post. I'm like, hey, Sarge, what's going on? They're like, you're not, just check U.S. Army, what the fuck moments. And I did. I was like, holy shit, what the
Yep.
fuck?
Yeah.
Um, and you guys all got yelled at and had to show your tattoos and shit. And it was just the 82nd fucking you. So
Yep. Classic mass punishment.
yeah, yeah, fuck. And then we
Guilty
had
until proven innocent, I guess.
just totally guilty. You shouldn't have been a fucking X-ray, you loser.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, just shit like that. And you're like, man, that really was a strange, strange time in my life. But back to strange times. Like, you know, I talked to Dave Walton, and his first message to me was like, what did he say? I don't know if you're as supportive as what I'm trying to do as other people. I was like, hey, no, 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 absolutely, I am. I'm saying my perspective on how I trained up, went through the course, and graduated is just through my lens of how I did things. I had nothing other than 2 weeks in hell to study off, like to go off of. And that's what I thought things were. And I just did it all myself. And then when I got to the course, we got this group of friends, and all we did was fucking party and drink and then show up and pass and then go back to doing what we were doing. And like, there was none of this being serious, taking the course serious, or because after selection, it was like, you know, we did better by just being relaxed instead of hyper focused on trying to pass the shit. Okay, yeah, events came up that you're like, okay, I got to study for this test or something like that. But the vast majority of the course, we didn't. It wasn't game time until it was time to turn it on, and then it was immediately dick joke. Right, we have like turn that fucking serious knob off. Let's start making fun of people and blow some steam off. So it's just interesting how our year group, and it seems primarily our year group, and a few other guys have gotten out, and the generation has changed. Like they are hyper focused on passing these schools or these selections and things, and they're hyper focused during the course, and hopefully that's working out better in group. But some of the things I'm also hearing from group are like, group's not as great as it used to be. I'm like, fuck, I was just there for a few little bit ago. It seemed okay when I left, guys. And they're like, no. So do you think things are better now with the way that the students are taking things seriously, or is it just kind of, it's just how it is?
Yeah, that's an excellent question because I was the same way, man. I did pretty much the way that I spent my time outside the classroom during the Q course or outside of training is the exact opposite of how I would recommend someone to do it. Like you, I would go up to Raleigh on weekends, leave on Friday after work, go up to Raleigh until Sunday evening, come back hungover, go back to work or class on Monday, and got it done. Of course, like I said, you can get away with things when you're younger and a little more naive. But I think now the great thing, you said the internet kind of sucks, but depending on who you are, the internet can be a very valuable tool. For example, I don't know if you've heard the Huberman Lab podcast on alcohol that he did a couple years ago.
But yeah, two drinks a
Yeah.
week, not two
Yeah.
drinks a day, 2 drinks a week. And then I got this thing, but I was already sober, and it's unbelievable. Like what can have an effect on you? Unbelievable.
Yeah. And there's a lot of information out there like that, where if you know what to look for and if you know who to listen to and you're into not just going and performing during the day, but also just being a better person in general and feeling good, feeling motivated, feeling clear, recovering well, performing well, and kind of not trying to like interfere with all that kind of stuff and just do it anyway, like I did, then you have the tools for it now. And I think that could be very beneficial for a lot of people. Don't get me wrong. I think letting loose and chilling out and being social and enjoying yourself is part of a healthy lifestyle. But you can do that without drinking 24 course lights on a Saturday afternoon. Like, I promise you, I too stopped drinking. I haven't drank in probably 2.5 years. And for a little while, it kind of feels a little weird going to these social gatherings and not being the one person that, or maybe one of a few people that don't have alcohol in their hands. But you actually learn a lot about how to communicate and feel comfortable in situations sober, and things that I never really was comfortable with before. Because anytime I would do that stuff back in the day, I I felt like I needed the alcohol for it. And although I think you can balance, if you're a young kid going through the Q course, I don't think there's anything wrong with going and enjoying yourself. But at the same time, you're setting yourself up for most likely more success in general, not just in the Q course, but just health wise, well being wise, mental health wise, by kind of keeping your nose clean and putting the right amount of effort into your classroom day, but also doing the right things outside the gym, sleeping well, eating well. You're just going to be so much better off. And either route can work, but I feel like, and I think there's actually I have not seen or read the data on this, but it seems like, just from what I've picked up listening to other podcasts, books, and things like that, is that the current generation, the 18 to 24-year-old generation, just
Drink.
likes to party less. They like to drink less. And I think that's great. That's awesome. And of course, that Huberman Lab episode was an eye opener for a lot of people, but that's not it. I mean, there's tons of other information. I don't think there's any secret these days that going and binge drinking is in anything other than not good for you at all. So when I left group, it was kind of the time where they were a little bit, or at least the rumors were, the Q course was a lot more lenient. Like it was very hard to pass or to fail the Q course. Like you kept getting another try and another try because they were claiming that we picked the right guys at selection, and the Q course cadre, their job is to get these guys through the entire Q course, even if it takes extra time. And I didn't have anyone on my team where I noticed like they came to the team, some new guys, where I'm like, I don't know how the hell you made it through the Q course. I had solid new guys on my team, but I definitely heard through the Green Beret Bro Network that there were some cases like that. Like one guy on the team next to us showed up. This was like pretty close to when I was getting out, so I didn't really care all that much, but he showed up, and day 2 they put him on a no talking profile because he was just talking too much. And that's no way for a new guy to show up. Not that you have to show up and just be mute and be a weirdo, like speak when spoken to, of course. But if you are getting put on a no talking profile because you think you're hot shit, or you just don't know your place yet, then that can be problematic. And that's just one example, but I think they've kind of cleaned it up. And I could be wrong. Like I do not stay super tied into the Q course or SWIC or anything like that. I just kind of hear things through my clients and whatnot. But I think they've kind of cleaned it up. It's a little bit easier to actually, if you don't meet standards during the Q course, you're probably going to get maybe a recycle and then maybe booted. It used to be for us, if you got 2 recycles, that was it. Like after your second recycle, any part of the course, not just the same phase, but any part of the course, you get that third one and you're done. And I am not exactly sure if it's like that now, but I don't disagree with that rule. I think having a second try, absolutely. Like I recycled Ranger School. I recycled Florida phase of Ranger School. I'm glad I got that second try. But if you just continue to give guys tries and tries and tries, I think that can be a little bit problematic. But then again, who knows? I think we'll see how it plays out. I think right now too, just the fact that there's not much going on in the world that we're involved in conflict wise, whether you're tier 1 or SEALs or Green Berets, Rangers, you're kind of just, you got a lot of time to be bored and you have a lot of time to evaluate. And the good idea fairy shows up and they think of all these different things. So right now it's kind of just like a transition year or a transition period of time. I think at some point, just based on history and probability, I think something's going to cook off that we're going to be involved in at some point in the next decade or so, or maybe even sooner than that. So time will tell, but that's kind of my viewpoint on that one.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. There's people making decisions that have nothing. Like I'm not going to have a say in those decision making processes, but um, one thing I will say, like about the course, and I was talking to a guy the other day. He's like, when I was a cadre, he says, I could just tell when somebody wasn't going to make it by if they would ask me for even like a a pass or something to go to a wedding or something like that. And you could just tell the probability of somebody making it or graduating just went down exponentially if they're not 100% focused in making the course their only priority in life over like over their wife, over their kids, and whether you think that's right or not, that's not the issue here. We're all there to graduate, like to pass and get the beret, go to group. And as self-destructive as this is, I think that the guys that just drank and partied and had a good time through the course were probably more successful at graduating because when you're drinking, you don't really give a fuck about anything. You're not worried about your fucking family back home. You're not worried about your wife, you know, and then you wake up and you're hungover. You're like, I got to go to class. So you're only worried about the school and then you're worried about passing. And then when you go home, you're just partying. And then you push that pause button on the real world and you're like, you're kind of thinking about the course and stuff like that. You're neglecting your real responsibilities, and in your mind, you're placing that beret and that tab at the forefront by doing those things. So as self-destructive as it is, the guys that are just having that stress relief and toxically making the Q course their only priority in life probably did better than the guys that stressed out over it the whole time. Or they might have even been happier, and that was just their way of getting through it, I think. And now guys are the generations change. They're not drinking as much, so they're having to find ways to make the Q course their only priority in life and things like that. Everybody's going to adapt and go down a different road. But that's just what worked for our group of friends. And nobody dropped out. We all went through the whole time. We all passed together. Um, and it was just crazy to see. And then, but guys who weren't like, they were just off to the side or stuff would come up, they'd fall away and you'd never see them again. They're just gone. So, for better or worse, my technique worked for me. As I said way at the beginning, right? What worked for me is not going to work for somebody else. They're not in the same mindset, that have the same experience and things like that. But I don't know, different folks and different generations and things like that. But just interesting, like to the lengths we went to pass while we were there, and then to get to group, and it like none of it applies. It was just all like a entrance exam. Hey, you're going to learn all the real shit when you get here anyway. So we'll figure it
Yeah.
out.
I will say, just to caution people that are maybe aspiring, although like blowing off steam, like Nick was just saying, is definitely something that can kind of help you relax and take a load off. One of the most common reasons guys get dropped from the Q course is alcohol related incidents. So if you're going to go and burn it down, at least have an adult with you that can supervise and drive you and help you make decisions when you're incapable of making good decisions yourself.
100%. If you're going to ride that razor's edge, of giving a shit and not giving a shit, you are one decision or 1 minute away from getting dropped at all
Oh yeah.
times.
Oh yeah.
Like, it's there's no there's you're gonna stay focused on what you're doing. But what it worked, and maybe like I said, it doesn't work for everybody. Not the healthiest, but maybe the other way wouldn't have been the healthiest. Being stressed out and worrying. So whatever, man. I think what you guys are doing with your students, probably the fucking way to go. Especially, you bring up Huberman and things like that. But were there, when you went through, selection, was there ever a point? How did your preparation stack up to what selection was? And was there ever a point where you're like, what the fuck did I get myself into?
Yeah. It actually almost did by accident. I was very, very into endurance at that point in my life, like leading into the army. So I really didn't have anyone to compare my ability to perform. Like now you can post your time on Reddit and you'll get all these feedback and you can see what other people are doing, how fit they are, how not fit they are. Back then you couldn't do that. So I just trained the way I thought I should train. I knew what selection included. I knew that you had to be fast at running. I knew you had to be good at rucking. I knew you had to be able to carry things a lot. I knew you had to do a certain amount of push-ups, pull-ups, and at that time was sit-ups. And I knew you had to pass an obstacle course, climb a rope. So I did that. And of course I had SOPSI. SOPSI back then is not like it is today. It was basically a smoke fest. And if you hang on, at least for us, if you hang on during SOPSI, you have a really good chance of getting selected. My SOPSI class was a bloodbath. It was January. So everyone's right after Christmas break, everyone's head was kind of still at home on leave. And I remember we lost like 10 guys just on the layout because there were basically we got smoked, either told to run to this fence that was a couple hundred yards away or do duck walks or do low crawls through the gravel at Camp McCall. Any item on the packing list that one person didn't have, we would get smoked for it. And there were like probably like 3 items on the entire packing list that everyone had. So we got smoked a ton. This is before the PT test. And we lost 10 guys, give or take, just that day. Guys who were just like, nope, I'm out. I'm done. And the main difference between SOPSI and selection back then was you just get more sleep and more food. But it was still not the way that I would necessarily recommend someone to train. It's pretty much just selection junior, except you know exactly when you're not doing well and when you are doing well as a class in general. Whereas selection is just very ambiguous. You don't know whether you're doing well or not, which is a different stressor in and of itself. But my prep was specific in that I focused on the things that I knew I needed to do, which I kind of just listed. And I think that's one huge component that a lot of people overlook. Like I'll see, for example, just bringing up Reddit again. I'll see someone like, "Hey, how do I get my hand release push-ups better?" And like they'll get 12 comments from random people and not one of them mentions doing more hand release push-ups, more frequency or certain types. It's like, "Oh, you got to do weighted dips and you got to do bench presses with pauses." It's like specificity, guys. Yes, it's the same movement pattern, but to get really good at something that involves skill, believe it or not, all these movements involve skill. You train that specific thing. Of course, there are supporting exercises, bench press, other exercises that work those muscles, but your main focus to get better at a specific thing should be the hand release push-up. That's just one example of specificity. But, like these days, guys will do a bunch of biking and swimming and just bodybuilding splits. It's like you are not training to go and do a triathlon. You're training to go to selection. Nothing wrong with a periodic bike, swim, non-impact cardio just to kind of maintain. I have that in my SFAS prep program, but it's not like 3 or 4 days a week. I'm not going to the pool 3 or 4 days a week to get good at rucking. Like just doesn't, it's general aerobic capacity, but it's not specific. So although I definitely went way too hard and I did way too much volume and I did not treat, especially strength, like pure strength training exercises, like I did not treat that as I would today. I was specific enough. And also, I had just had that foundation of on foot endurance, mostly running, but I started rucking a little bit before I joined. And that transferred over really well. And I showed up, again, not knowing how I'd stack up, but like first day of basic training, I won the 2 mile by quite a bit. And I was just a faster individual. I've always just been a pretty solid rucker and runner. And I ended up winning at selection out of the 4 gates. I won 3 of them. So I came in second in the short ruck and was the first finisher in both runs and the long ruck. And I'm like, okay, well, I definitely have the physical capacity to do this. Of course, that's just the first week. So I still had to go do land nav. I had developed enough confidence during SOPSI for land nav. I did pretty well. I kind of found it. It came pretty quickly. Like I learned pretty quickly how to do land navigation. And so I did fine on the star course. And then during team week, I was on a less strong team, let's just call it, for the first 2 days. And then I was on a very, very good team, a super solid team, like first team's done on the second 2 days. And that's kind of like where I came into my own. I was sort of having like flashbacks of high school football. I was a captain for my team. All 3 sports I played, I was a captain. So I was kind of like calling back upon those leadership qualities as an X-ray. Of course, I didn't really know how to tie knots. I didn't really know anything about building apparatuses, but I had the physical fitness for it. I was still like pretty fresh. Of course, everyone's a little banged up by then, but I was not feeling super run down or banged up, and I could continue to, take extra shifts, volunteer for the worst position on the team. And I was vocal enough in the right situations where guys perceived me as a strong leader. And so even if my prep wasn't perfect, I think it was still good enough. It's not the same way I would prep today, or it's not the same way I'd prep my clients, but that specificity component is huge. And that should be like one of the number one things is if you're looking to be good at running and rucking, if you are looking to be good at push-ups, pull-ups, etc., if you know you're going to need to carry multiple different objects for hours and hours and hours, day after day, then your training should not just include that, but it should be centered around that. That should be like the main focuses. And then you kind of work down from there and focus on some of your strengths and weaknesses. And most importantly, another thing guys mess up is they train way, way, way too hard. They almost like try to mimic selection in their training. And going back to what we were talking about earlier with fatigue, like you need to recover from your training. So if you're showing up to selection with a nagging knee issue or nagging foot issue, or you have shin splints already, or if you're just overtrained in general, like you have joint pain, you're just fatigued, run down, you've kind of plateaued for a while, which believe it or not, a lot of guys show up to selection like that because they just train too hard and they don't taper long enough. They don't give their body a chance to kind of recuperate and that inflammation to go down, their nervous system to get more primed again to perform. So they show up already to a course that is literally designed to break you down. They show up already broken down. And you're not going to you can grind through it. You can grit it out. Some guys do. But ideally, you build yourself up. So you have a high ceiling from which to fall when you show up. That way you can get broken down for a lot longer before you get down to baseline, instead of being just maybe above baseline, maybe around your baseline, and then you're just digging yourself out the entire time. It's just really hard to hang on that way.
What's your purpose at this time? You're getting selected because you're civilian. You got one way of thinking. You're like, oh, this is going to be tough. I'm going to be one of the best. But now you're getting through selection. What are you thinking now? How's your perspective changing?
Yeah. So I think, like a lot of people, you think selection is like the biggest hurdle that you have to get over. And I think everyone thinks that until they get over it, and then they get into the next phase or the next endeavor.
I will say, coming from the regular Army, once I got selected, that was the deviation of my career. Like, up until I got that piece of paper, I was needs of the Army, and they could do whatever they wanted with me. After I got that sheet of paper, it was all up to me. My whole career was as much effort as I'm going to put into it within reason is up to me, whether I'm going to get my beret or not. So it was all gas from that point on. So I really, I waffle on that one. I think meant like that for that, like, gut check, right? Selection is the top of the mountain and the rest is up to you, because now it's all up to you. When you're in the regular Army and shit, and you're in the Army, there's not many fucking things you can influence. But now, okay, it's up to you, kid. You got the ticket, golden ticket. Now make it happen. So I waffle back and forth on that. If it is actually the top of the mountain or not, or the
Yeah.
hardest obstacle, I mean. But
Yeah.
that's just
I
my
definitely,
perspective.
I can definitely see that viewpoint. For me, I always felt like I could always rely on being physically capable. Like I could, if all else failed, I'm still going to run fast, ruck fast, crush PT tests, all that kind of stuff. The fact is, though, when you get to the Q course, you have to be good at other things. You have to pass tests. You have to, do small unit tactics. You have to, as an 18 X-ray, pretend to know enough about leading a squad through an ambush and movement and all that kind of stuff. And so certain parts of that for me were drinking from a fire hose. Like, especially when I first started SOCM, I had non-existent study habits, like not even poor study habits, just non-existent, as you could probably guess from my college attempts. And the first part of SOCM, like the first 4 or 5 months, is almost all academics, test taking and memorization. And they'll ask you this multiple choice question where 3 of the answers are pretty much correct. You just have to find out which one's the most correct and answer that one. So that one was definitely drinking from a fire hose for me. I had to put a lot more work in than some of my peers in order to just get a decent grade. I was nowhere near like top of my class or anything like that.
It's
But
crazy.
this,
Everybody says that. Like, there's nobody that's like, yeah, I had it. Everybody says I had to put a lot of more work in than the rest of my peers. I think everybody thinks that because they're at home like up till 4 in the morning studying, get a half hour of sleep and go in. Like, everybody thinks they had to put in more, but it's our perception that other people are doing better than us
yeah,
somehow.
yeah,
And like, we're like, fuck, I'm so far behind. I think everybody was far behind, and they just thought that other people had their shit together. They had a perspective that they had their shit together, which nobody does,
well,
especially in Delta Force.
I had a guy in my class who was I think he was a Stanford graduate, and he was an 18 X-ray with me. And he would sit next to me in class because we were like alphabetical. So back of the room, I was S, he was W. And he would read a novel throughout the entire class, just read a novel completely unrelated to the topics. But he would still, when they'd ask a question, he'd still raise his hand and answer the question properly and then go right back to reading his novel.
Yeah,
I
well, that
believe
you can't compete with that. That's
exactly.
yeah, you
Yeah.
can't compete
I,
with that.
I'm
So,
pretty
like,
sure at this point he got out. I think he's a surgeon now. But anyway, I also had a Swedish doctor in my class as well, like literally an MD from Sweden. We had a couple tier 1 guys from other countries too. I had a German KSK medic in my class. So
okay, I
although,
redact my statement. Some people are better than you. Okay, there are people that are better than you.
yeah. Well, anyway, the second part of SOCM, probably the last third, maybe a little more than the last third, is mostly hands-on stuff. So it's like doing actual trauma scenarios. And that is when I started to like kind of realized that it was more of a strength of mine than to take tests and get the right answers on a test. So I did all right on that. That was kind of a confidence builder. Of course, that part of SOCM is like super high stress. You know, you're working really, really long days. And even some really solid guys still don't make it through that part. There's a little luck involved, of course. It can be kind of like cadre roulette. Some of the instructors are a little bit more harsh than the other ones, or at least they were then. But I thought like the the most difficult parts of the Q course were mostly for me academic, as well as just the sheer duration of it. So, you know, I was in the Q course for over 2.5 years. There were a bunch of white space parts in between each phase back then. I think it's a little bit more streamlined today than it was back then. But like we would have 3 or 4 weeks between SEER and SUT, or 3 or 4 weeks between some other phases, and just having the ability to show up every day and just remember that the gratification is so far in the future. Delayed gratification is something I talk about a lot with like my clients and my content. Is like the Q courses, honestly, SF in general is just this big exercise in delayed gratification. And the world today is just not really set up to be good for people to be able to accept delayed gratification, because we can always get instant gratification. If I want, I can get on my phone and order whatever I want for food. It'll get delivered to my doorstep. If I'm bored, I can go on Instagram and just scroll my life away, or watch YouTube or something like that. Or if I'm hungry, I can just go to my fridge and grab whatever I want. And unless you're really, really intentional about it, especially these days, back then it wasn't quite as bad, but these days in particular, you're not going to be well suited to be able to handle the level of delayed gratification from the Q course. Because also, add to that, you're not really getting immediate feedback either. Like, you're not sure if you're going to pass this, or, you know, of course, tests are like black and white, but SUT, you're not sure. Like, I don't know. I think I did pretty well, but he's not going to tell me for a little while whether I passed or not. And that can be definitely a little bit of a mental grind and a little bit of a difficult thing to kind of grasp psychologically. And I don't think when I was in it, I had a lot of trouble with it. I was just like, all right, I'm just going to show up tomorrow and do my job. But kind of looking back, I can reflect on certain parts where like, is this ever going to end? Am I ever going to get there? What if this, and this happens? There's so many things that are possible to ruin your chances. You might get dropped for something that you didn't do, or something minor that you never thought would get you dropped. You always kind of had, or at least I did. I kind of always had in the back of my mind, I hope I make it through this next day or this next week. And there's so many possible. I definitely am a more of a worst case scenario thinker, just inherently. But that's kind of probably the biggest thing I struggled with. But looking back, I would say the sheer duration of it was probably the most difficult part, rather than like anything specific in particular.
Student stress is what you're
Yeah.
describing. It's just
Yeah.
that thing we put on ourselves. And the cadre told us about it, and the Charlie course told us about it one time. He's like, you guys drive me nuts. You know how to do the stuff. We'll do the practical instruction, and then you come out here in the FTX and you shit the bed. Like, you just did it back at in the classroom, and then you come out here and you're amped up. And he was trying to, he's like, just relax. Like, I'm just, he didn't say it. But he's like, I'm just like you guys. I just did this a few years ago. Just fucking do what we teach you to do, and you're going to be successful. But you're right. There's some luck in that involved too, like in knowing to trust your gut. Because one guy in the Charlie course, he only passed because like he made a huge decision. It was impressive. Like, he made a decision to cut this much off of his time fuse in the dark because the temperature had gone down 40 or 50 degrees from the daytime to the nighttime. And he got dropped for the same thing, the course, like the course before, and he had to do the Charlie course again. And I mean, he cut this much off in the dark, and he was going like this, and he passed like right on the mark because he cut that off there. And like, that's your whole SF career hinges sometimes on trusting your gut and what they teach you and things like that. And so there's definitely some luck involved in the course. It's a fucking weird thing. You
Yeah,
know?
for sure.
Fuck yeah, man. So, you're Delta, or you're gonna be a Delta, you get to Robin Sage. I remember our Deltas were pretty cocky when they got to Robin Sage because I feel like they felt that they were going to pass. Because as always, group is pretty short on Deltas always. Um, and I think that these guys, they were like, they're like, it was the attitude at the time was, you get through SFMS and then you're pretty good. They're not failing Deltas out of Robin Sage, right, or at all. Was that kind of an attitude that you saw going through at your time?
I didn't necessarily have that impression going into Robin Sage. However, I was on a lane in Robin Sage with four or three other medics. I was one of four medics on our lane, and our instructors were not medically proficient. I had a 18 Echo and I think an 18 Bravo as an instructor, and our medical responsibilities as well as our actual medical mass casualty mission was not very difficult. We had
Maybe that was it. Maybe the medics knew from the course that if your cadre is not a medic, then they don't really know how
could
to
be
evaluate. So they just kind of they got to Sage and they were like, "This dude's a Bravo through and through. We got this." And maybe that's it because the
it
rumor
could
mill
be.
in the course has got some good information sometimes. So maybe that was it.
Yeah, and honestly, when I went through, you probably did this too. I was a G when I was in IUW, so we went out to a different lane. The lane that I was on as a G was had an insane mass casualty scenario, like absolutely nuts. The guys passed it, but it was chaotic, which usually mass casualty scenarios are chaotic. Ours that we got was pretty vanilla. Just, there were certain things going on, and there were four of us. So you need a lot of casualties for it to be a mass casualty with 418 deltas on one team. So I will say though, me and the three other deltas almost got dropped because it was January 2014, 2013, and it was one of the coldest Januaries on record in North Carolina. So cold that multiple nights we administratively did not do fire guard just because guys would, get frostbite or hypothermia if we did. But it was so cold, and our 18 Bravo instructor was very much he thought that we should be doing foot checks 3 times per day, checking people's feet, having them take their boots off, having them take their socks off, and checking their feet just to make sure they don't have trench foot, frostbite, whatever. And us being deltas, we knew that, if you're just sitting around and like not walking through water and you're moving around all day, like you don't need 3 foot checks per day. So we tried to get away with 2. And somehow this instructor got word of it that we were only doing 2 a day, and he brought all four of us into a group, talked to us for a good hour about like, I'm going to drop you. You guys are not following instructions. You guys are terrible deltas. I would not want you on my team. Yada yada yada. I don't remember any like specifics. And then at the end, he's like, "But I'm going to give you guys another chance." So we all thought we were going to get dropped for doing 2 foot checks a day instead of 3, which would have been insane. But aside from that, the medical responsibilities weren't much. We did the dishes, we dug a slit trench, and made sure like no one got frostbite, and that was pretty much it.
Hmm. Yeah. I know what you mean there. I remember the cadre just when I was a G just comes up and just spraying me like constantly with the blood. He's looking around and then he puts the thing over my neck. I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? Because I didn't know. They didn't tell us. He comes up with a squirt bottle. He's like, you're fucking dead. Well, I wasn't dead, but he's like, you've been shot. It's a fucking zoo. It was a fun time though. Um, you're like, how are some of these? How did no? Looking back on some of them, you're like, how did nobody get hurt doing some of these things? Like
Yeah, they're wild.
flying down the road in the back of a pickup truck with a tarp over us. I'm like, we got to be going fast. This can't be safe. But hey, whatever. We made it to the end. Yeah. But yeah, yeah, it's fun. One thing that popped into my head earlier, since you were in the February class of SFAS, and this doesn't matter for the story or whatever, but do you remember a guy named Jimmy who was like a professional runner? He was in the SOPSI class before you. I've talked about this on the show before, and I can't get anybody to corroborate it. It's the you get to a place and you're like, I was ready for selection, and I we go out to do the PT test, and we take off down the. So I'm in the second group, and the first I get about just over past halfway done, and this guy is running back already and passes me, and I'm like, he's only 2 minutes ahead of us. I was like, the dude runs a 9 something 2 mile. And I'm like, maybe I'm not cut out to be here. And he was in the SOPSI class before you guys and went to selection in January with me. And I was like, I've always thought about that guy like, Jesus Christ. He doesn't even know who I am, and I don't even know who he is. But it was just, to this day, is the most impressive thing I've ever seen in person physically, was somebody jog a 9 something 2 mile at selection and then was like, you know, whew, all right, cool. And then smoked the fucking ruck and the
I bet.
long
Yeah.
runs. And I asked the other x-rays about him. He's like, man, Sopsy for him was like, he would smoke the cadre. They would send
Oh yeah. Of
these guys out who were excellent at rucking, and he would just waste them. Like, he could not smoke this. So they smoked the shit out of him in the pit and stuff like that.
course. Yeah.
But I was just wondering if that popped into my head, if you remember that
I
guy.
I had a buddy named Jimmy that I'm still friends with, but he was not a stud runner. And
Okay.
he's still in. But I can say this guy's full name because he's like public. He's like a Spartan race world champion. Rob Killian. He's an officer. I don't think he's in anymore, but he was a couple classes ahead of me. And I remember him running like 26-minute 5 miles and doing the 12-mile ruck in like under an hour and a half. So yeah, there's some freaks out there. Don't get me wrong. You do not have to be that fit in order to make it, of course, thankfully, but there are
No,
definitely some freaks out there.
no, you do not. No, absolutely. Like I say, this isn't ideal. This is just because it keeps me sane and I like it. I enjoy it. So you graduate, 18 X-ray, and like I say, I joke that was in the first easy class. Like, I'm on par with you guys because we've X-rays and I have been in the same time in service. I just got to go fuck off in the regular army while you guys got the shit smoked out of you. And then we all met up at the same point at graduation with same time in service and shit like that. So, SUT and some of those other things where I was just on par. I just kind of got lucky that, focus wasn't on me as an X-ray. They thought I had experience, which I fucking didn't, but whatever, it worked out for me. So we get to graduation, pass language school, and you get to your beret, you get your beret. And again, we think we've climbed some mountain, but in reality, that's just a checkpoint. Okay, good. You check the box. Now you're off to group. How are you feeling now?
Yeah, so I made a mistake that I tell a lot of people these days not to make, and that is to feel like you've arrived, because the fact is you've never arrived. Like, you always need to show up and continue to prove yourself. And although I didn't do anything that would give other people the sense that this guy thinks he's hot shit and he's arrived and the hard work is done, I kind of felt like, oh, all right, cool. Now I'm the cool guy. And of course, that didn't last very long, because then you show up to group and you are the low man on the totem pole. You're the FNG. And so, although I had that extra confidence, maybe a little bit of cockiness that I just made it, I had maybe like a month and a half off before I basically went home, saw a bunch of old friends, got all the praise, whatever. And then I drove out to Colorado to show up at 10th group, and I'm like, oh, here we go. And honestly, I showed up to 10th group, and I was one of 3 guys to show up to my company, 3 new guys. I was the only Delta, and I was the only one not married. So the entire company, minus the rear D, was deployed in Africa, in Niger. And because I was the only Delta, and the company was actually very low on Deltas. Each team had 1 Delta. There was no B team Delta. I was, of course, probably going to get given a responsibility pretty quickly. And it was Christmas break. We showed up right before Christmas break. And my basically welcome to 10th group was, all right, so you live in the barracks, right? Yep. You're going to do CQ on Christmas Day. And you are also going to deploy by yourself and go and switch out with a medic who is on the mountain team right now, who's coming back for mountain warfare school, and you're going to take his place on New Year's Day. So Christmas Day I had CQ, and then
Did
New
you have
Year's
to wear
Day.
your uniform?
Oh yeah, yep.
Yep.
And so I did that, and then I flew over commercial on New Year's Day. And luckily, he was not immediately coming home, so we had like 10 days to do left seat, right seat, and I could like learn about the team and the medic's job and stuff like that. It wasn't a combat deployment; it was in Niger. Although something bad happened a couple years later in Niger, we were in that same area, but for us, it wasn't the same.
Shout out
And
to Michelle Black. Pick up her book of sacrifice and you can learn more about what happened to
is that
the third group.
Dustin?
That is for Brian
The
Black. Brian Black's
right?
wife wrote
Yep,
this one. So
yep,
quick shout out. I always try to on there, but yeah,
absolutely.
that's what I did. I didn't want to interrupt you there. I was like, why
No,
is
no,
10th group there? But yeah, I guess
that was that.
overlapping.
That was right when 10th group and 3rd group were about to switch out for
Oh,
Africa.
okay.
So at that time, 10th group was Europe as well as Africa. And then we switched with 3rd group not long after that. So I ended up doing another Africa trip later in my career with 3rd group. But anyway, I went over there. Luckily, that team was very accommodating. I showed up and, I, of course, did what I recommend most new guys do is like not talk too much, not think you're hot shit, ask questions when you have to, speak when spoken to, go and perform, prove yourself. You're not going to be the most proficient individual on the team, but at least show people that you care and that you want to learn and that you want to play your role on the team, whatever that role may be. And so that was kind of like a really kind of a blessing because that team I've definitely heard of. I've never been on a team like this, but I've heard of absolute nightmare experiences for new guys where they're just treated like scum. And some guys I guess maybe deserve to be treated like that, but I've always thought that if a new guy shows up and proves that he's competent and capable, even if he's not like an expert or he doesn't know exactly what to do or he's not like a super animal at everything, at least give the guy a little bit of respect and allow him to prove himself. Of course,
Nobody
if
deserves to be treated like shit. They deserve to be
agreed, yeah,
put through their paces, but nobody deserves to be treated like shit when they get to group. That's bullshit. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. Luckily, I was never on a team like that. I always gave new guys the respect they deserve. Of course, not everyone who shows up is ready to go, and they might need some remedial training or a little bit of an ass kicking, proverbially,
Yeah.
like figuratively speaking. But yeah, that was my first trip, and then I got back. And because the team or the company was so short on deltas and our sergeant major at the time was a little bit backwards, he brought me back to the B team. So I did like 6 months on the B team. And although I was not super thrilled with that, usually for those who are not aware, the new delta does not become the B team delta. Usually it's a more experienced delta. But for manning issues, every team had one delta. And that's just kind of the way it worked out. Wasn't super pumped about that at the time. However, the positive benefit of that is I got to know all the teams and got to know the leadership, got to know the guys on the team, especially the deltas. As the B team medic, you're literally in charge of S1 for the entire company or manning. So you build a lot of relationships and you have to go to the teams and knock on doors and talk to people that, don't want to hear what you're having to say. But anyway, I had to do that. That was a pretty good learning experience. And the other benefit of that is I got to know certain teams a lot better and basically had a new sergeant major coming in and he almost gave me like an option. He's like, what team, if you're going to go to a ODA, what team would you prefer to go to? And I was like, boom, I'd like to go to 3-4, the free fall team. Of course, everyone wants to
Yeah.
jump out of planes, and ended up going there, did my whole time at 10th group there up until 18 when I went and did the long walk, which we can get into if you want.
We'll get there. Interesting though, you did the Niger J set, and then the next team to go was the next because you guys went in on or about the
15.
beginning of 15, and
Yep.
then their ODA went at the beginning of in 16, and then they went for a second time. So if we can dive into that, because what was the what was the intelligence saying then on your first trip there? Because obviously things escalated 2 years later to a fucking, I think, a complex ambush with hundreds of people coming fucking up out of
Yes.
the sand, out of nowhere to take that team down. I mean, down, they almost wiped the whole team out. And just 2 years earlier, pretty quiet, right?
Right. It was not even on our radar. We had a slightly different mission set than that third group team did. We were there with the dive team as well. So I was on the mountain team at this time. The dive team was also there. The dive team was doing the same thing that third group team ended up doing. So they were doing the more so not a combat trip, but like they got into some ticks. We didn't get into any ticks. We were training with our partner force, but they weren't like the special operations guys. They were just like the regular military guys. And so we would go out on patrols, but they were just training patrols. We weren't actually trying to go and do KLEs or anything like that. So it was a little bit different, but we were in that same area. Like anytime you're around the borders in Niger, you're always a little bit more aware and vigilant just because you never know. So of course we were, locked and loaded, but that intel, like we had no idea that I was completely shocked to hear that happened. I actually went through the entire Q course with Dustin, right? And it was very, very shocking to hear about that, but wasn't on our radar whatsoever. And I honestly am not very well educated on the details of what went down for that. I know they were doing a KLE near the border and the KLE key leadership engagement. And I want to say, I could be off with some of these facts, but I want to say that the people they were doing KLEs with had planned to ambush them like from the get-go. And once I think they did the KLE and they were like about to go back, and for whatever reason, they had to stay a little bit longer, or they decided to stay a little longer. And that's when they got hit. And luck, I mean, of course it was terrible, but like you said, they're lucky that more guys weren't wiped out because they were just outmanned. They had no ISR. They had really no support whatsoever. So the fact that even some of the guys, or I would say most of the guys that were there, got out of it is kind of a miracle, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm not. I know there's for me personally, hard line at critiquing any combat experience. I have no resume, so I don't offer mine. I would just refer you to Michelle's book of what she uncovered trying to find out what to happen to her husband. But yeah, it was inferred that the villagers delayed the team, and possibly had knowledge of what was coming for them. The team saw that was happening and got hit as they were getting the fuck out of there. So if they would have been held up any longer, things might have turned out differently. But not an armchair quarterback. Not saying anything about anybody fucking terrible thing. And I wasn't there at all. But there's some reference material on how that was handled, and it's just too bad. But that shit,
For sure.
unfortunately, that shit happens.
Yeah, it
So
does.
so you rotate out of there, and then how'd you get over to third group?
Flash forward a couple years, I did a couple of other J sets to Europe during that time at 10th group. And I was kind of just not necessarily, I was looking to do something challenging again. That's just kind of the way I'm wired. And ever since I first did a ruck march, a 12-mile ruck across the street from the unit compound, anyone who's been in the Q course knows exactly that parking lot I'm talking about, where you step off for that 12-miler right across from the CAG gate. And ever since then, I had always just had a dream of going there. And it had been about 4 years, and it was kind of coming to that time. I went to Ranger School, MFF, and static line jump master, nothing crazy. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to put a packet in. So I decided to put a packet in to go take the long walk in 2018, spring of 2018 is when I went to that, and honestly did really well there, well enough to get selected. And that was super exciting. That was a crazy milestone for me in my life. But just like I was kind of talking about earlier, selection and the rest of it is a totally two different beasts. So I was kind of referring to this earlier. Physical fitness, the ability to move on my feet, I've always been able to kind of rely on that and hold my own, more than hold my own. But turns out in OTC, yes, you have to be really fit. OTC, by the way, operator training course, it's a 6-month course that you go through in order to get invited into the unit, like to actually go to a Sabre squadron and be an operator. OTC, totally different beast. Lots of high stress scenarios. Not that they put a ton of stress on you, but they just, the performance standards are so high, and you are drinking from a fire hose the whole time, or at least I was. Even guys who had CRIF experience, even guys who were, Rangers, they struggle too. During OTC, specifically, the part of it that most people struggle with is the CQB portion. And turns out that's what I struggled with the most as well. I made it to about the 3.5 month mark, and I got a drop warning. And most people at some point during their OTC experience get a drop warning. But if you get a drop warning and then you mess up again, worse than what they consider to be, something that they consider to be grounds for dismissal, then you're going to get dropped. There's really no questioning it. There's really no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So I went a good 5 or 6 weeks from my drop warning to when I actually got dropped. When you get a drop warning too, there are, in most classes, there are more instructors than students in the class, which rightfully so. Like, you want someone watching everything everyone does. That's probably a good thing, because that's how you assess someone in the way that I feel like they want to assess them, and make sure that they're not missing anything or letting anyone slip through the cracks. So I was getting watched by an extra instructor throughout that entire time, and I had a really bad day. Just made some bad decisions in CQB. You have to make really fast decisions, and they have to be the right decision, or at least mostly right enough to not mess anything up. And it wasn't anything like, I didn't, do anything safety wise, or it wasn't anything crazy. It was just, I had a really bad day. And my first run, I remember the first run of the day, I was not doing very well. And that was kind of just the thing that got it started. And it was just in my head and couldn't bounce back from it. Just continued to perform poorly that day. And sure enough, the very next day, they called me in, and he unfortunately dropped me. So, of course, that was definitely a crushing blow. And I did not handle that the way I would recommend other people handle failure. I did a lot of drinking, a lot of feeling sorry for myself. When I got dropped, I had like a good 6 or 7 months before I was basically being sent to any other unit. They ended up sending me to third group, but it was a while before I went. So I went to like SLC, and honestly, pretty much went in every Friday just to talk to the S1 guy and tell him I was still alive. But aside from that, I was just on my own. I basically wasn't even in the military at that time. And needless to say, there's a lot of time to think and reflect and make not the best decisions. So I did quite a bit of drinking. I kept myself in shape because I knew I was going to have to go back to group. And eventually I went to third group in the summer of 2019 and got to third group, did a little bit of time on the B team, ended up going to the dive team. And then in 2020, a couple months after COVID, we deployed to Afghanistan. So we went to Camp Dalkey, which is formerly known as Fob Shank, and we're there. The war was dying down at this time. And also there were so many restrictions about pretty much everything with COVID going on that we did not really have what I would consider like a full, robust combat deployment. Even though it was a combat deployment on paper, we still, did some fun things, and it felt meaningful. And that was a 6-month trip. We were the last Americans on the ground at Camp Dalkey. Flew out, I think it was like just before Christmas of 2020. And yeah, got back, stayed on the dive team the entire time I was at third group. I am not a diver. I am a dive medic. And the way third group does it, I don't think other groups are like this. At least 10th group wasn't. But the way they do it at third is, in the battalion, every 5 team is considered the dive team, but only one of them is like the first team dive team, where like everyone on the team's a combat diver. And if you're not a diver, you're like not on that team. We were like the third team. Each company has like a number 1 team. So like our free fall team right next door was the number 1 free fall team, like the top dog free fall team. And the other guys were, second string, third string, but we happened to be the third string dive team. So we were much more of a maritime team. We did a lot of on the water stuff. So we'd go down to Key West all the time. I had only like 3 or 4 divers on my team, but got sent to dive medic school. And for those not aware, anytime you do any water stuff, because we would send our new guys, we would prep our new guys for MAC and send them to dive school and stuff like that. But anytime you do any sort of that training, you have to have a dry dive medic that's on the pool deck, just making sure, it's pretty hazardous training. So did that, and then did one more trip to Malawi, Africa. It was a very, very short trip. We had some equipment issues. So it was like a 45-day trip, and we only really trained for like 25 of them because it took so long for our equipment to get there. And while I was there, I kind of started thinking like, maybe I'm going to get out. Who knows? My enlistment is coming up, or my opportunity to either re-enlist and stay in for another 8 years. I would have to go in def at that point, or get out, was coming up. But also, I was not 100% sure that I wanted to get out. So I sort of started to think about going to the Fox Force. My team sergeant was like, hey, you want to go to the Fox Force? And when we got back from that, ended up going to the Fox Force, became an 18 Fox. Spent about 6-7 months on my team as an 18 Fox. And turns out my date was coming up where I was either going to ETS or stay in and re-enlist. And I had started my business as a side gig. I was not targeting the exact, like not even close to the same audience as I am now. I was just making general fitness content. So if you go back to like my earlier posts, episodes, all that stuff, I never really talked about my job. I didn't show my face very often. It was mostly just like text posts, and I would record my podcasts, just audio, no video. Because I didn't want to still be in and like putting my name out there and like gaining a big following as someone who's still in, just trying to be more of a quiet professional than, the type of guy that just asks for attention and talks about their job all the time. I wanted to build a following of people that listened to me and took my advice for the quality of the advice, not the job that I did. So I was doing that at the time, and I didn't even, at that time, I hadn't even planned on getting out and focusing mostly on the next generation of SF like I do right now. That kind of came after I got out, but I was doing that on the side and I was really enjoying it. I would wake up super early before work on it for a few hours in the morning before going to work. I'd come back, work on it all weekend, like just write articles, podcasts, try and build a following, I wasn't making any money off this. I had a couple of clients, but they were like under the table clients. Like I wasn't even really charging them. I just wanted to get experience coaching people. And I did that a lot throughout my career. I just did training programs and helped guys prep for various selections and things like that. So I had that experience, just not officially coaching them. And I just found that at one point I was just way more invested in what I was doing with my side gig than my actual job. And I personally don't think if you're not invested in the job, like if you are not eating, sleeping, breathing, being a Green Beret every single day, then it's kind of you're doing people a disservice by still doing it. And 8 years is a long time. So if I had reenlisted, I would have had to commit to another 8 years. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to take this risk and get out. So not recommended, but I cleared out of the Army in like 2 months. That was a complete nightmare doing that in 2 months, but it can be done if you happen to decide way late. So I didn't really get a chance to do all that much as an 18 Fox. I probably would have become a team sergeant somewhat soon. Maybe like if I had stayed in, it might have been like a year and a half later. But I got out and I was definitely nervous. It was a big risk because like I said, was not making any money whatsoever. Usually when you have a side gig and a real gig, you get out or you stop doing your real gig once your income is at least somewhat close to your current job. And mine was not even close. So definitely took a risk there. But I'm glad I did because I've been doing that ever since.
I mean, fuck, that's good, man. Like, you got to listen to yourself and make the best decision. But going back there, why did you go on the long walk? What were you telling yourself at that point? Was it like it's the time, or was it, what I'm doing isn't enough? There's a higher mountain to climb in the distance, and I want to try and do that.
I would say more so the latter. I've always just kind of wanted to see what my body and my mind and my skills were made out of and what I could possibly handle. And of course, There's a lot of mystique around the unit in general, but even the selection. And it played into my strengths pretty well. I've always been a good rucker, a good runner. I've always been confident in my land nav skills. And pretty much that entire selection is land naving with a ruck on. You only run one time. On the first day, you do a PT test, and that's it. The rest is just out on your own land naving. There's no team week. There's no nothing. It is on you to decide your fate, plan your routes, walk your routes. And I think I always thought that was just like a really cool thing. Also, it's on you to decide like how you feel. Like you can bring your own food, you can bring your own supplements, like how you fuel during these long days, and you're just in charge of your fate. And it's pretty grueling. It's day after day after day. I would say in general, not every day is harder than the day before, but in general, the intensity and the difficulty and the lengths and the terrain gets harder and harder throughout that selection. But I always was just drawn to that challenge, and I've always just had tons and tons of respect for the unit, and I wanted to see if I could possibly get there, and got most of the way there. Just unfortunately was not able to bring it together when I had to during the later stages of OTC, but selection was quite an awesome experience. And I would say if anyone has the gumption to go do it, don't just go on a whim. Of course, there's guys that really, really want to go that may not get it accepted. And there's some guys that just kind of go on a whim, and you see them like guys doing the 18-miler on day one in like 4.5 hours. Like, did you even prepare for this thing? But for the most part, like it's the best of the best. These guys are hard charging, high achieving, very, very type A. And it's cool to be around people like that, even if it didn't work out perfectly in my favor.
How long did it take you to change your mindset, to come to the realization that, hey, man, trying and failing is way better than not trying at all? Because it sounds like you took it kind of hard when you got dropped, but that happened. I mean, you probably would, and it probably was your I don't want to say like your lack of a support system, right? Because if you had gone from a team to the selection and then go back to the team, you're back with the boys, but you were already in the course and you get dropped. There's no boys, you're just lone ranger out there by himself. How long did it take you to pull out of that and be like, hey, we gave it our fucking best shot?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. I always say, or I frequently say, I probably would not be doing what I'm doing right now had I made it through OTC. So, although anything could happen, I have no idea how it would have turned out. Of course, you could what if it all day long, but that was like the thing. That was my pinnacle. Like, if I make it through here, I'm going to do this for the rest of my career until I have to stop doing it. And so when I got dropped, yeah, I was very depressed, probably for a good 3 to 4 months afterwards. But even when I showed up to third group, I still almost felt like I had let other people down for whatever reason. Like I felt kind of like inadequate when I showed up to my ODA. Like, even though I was an SF guy before at a different group, even though I made it through 2/3 of OTC, I still felt like I was kind of like a failure for a little while. And then during that time is when I kind of started to transition my thought process into, what I really love fitness. I really love strength and conditioning. I really love helping people. And I've been doing it kind of on the side for this entire time. So I almost kind of like found purpose in that. And I also started to make really good friends on my new team. And we started to have great times together. And I almost had not forgotten about, of course, I'll never forget about the fact that I got dropped. But I started to feel more so like I belong there. And like that just happened for a reason. And I wasn't intended for whatever reason. I wasn't intended to go and serve in the unit. So I would say overall, once I started to really truly consider getting out, that's when I started to not be so down on myself for that failure, which was probably about a year and a half later is when I started to really actually legitimately think like, hey, maybe I'm not going to stay in, because I had always intended to stay in for 20 years, even in SF. But that's kind of how it happened slowly over time. It wasn't just like one day I woke up and I'm like, whatever. It was definitely a slow process, but I was able to like find purpose. And of course, like I have a good support system. Like my wife supports everything that I do. My family does. So like they're always going to be there for me. They're never going to think less of me for failing at something, especially something like that like not a lot of people even get an opportunity to go to, let alone pass all and make it all the way through. So that kind of helped as well, and just kind of gave me a solid perspective on the other possibilities of what may be out there for me in life. And even though it was a really rough point in my life, I can honestly say like I'm somewhat glad it happened, because otherwise I wouldn't be here right now talking to you on this episode, let alone doing what I'm doing right now. And I'd probably still be in the army. Not to say that I'd be miserable, because I would have probably chosen to stay in the army and do what they're doing, but you never know. Like I have made peace with it over time. And I think it was probably like a very good learning point, because I had never really failed anything big other than recycling Florida phase. I never really failed something that was that, I guess, that big or that uh, uncommon, or that many people. I'm losing my train of thought.
Prestigious.
That prestigious, and so sorry, dude.
No,
I'm
you're
losing my
good.
train of thought.
Here's what popped into my head when you're saying all this, right? Like, it's one thing to win the Super Bowl and then repeat, right? Do you ever look at the numbers of the teams that lose the Super Bowl? They usually have a losing record the next season, um, because it's just such a letdown. Do you think, you know, you saw that as the top of the mountain, like that? I want to accomplish this and I want to get there and to prove myself I could do it. And then when you didn't accomplish it, you went, you look back, you went, maybe that's it for the army. That's all the army can offer me. The top of the mountain is where I'm at. And you kind of, that factored into your decision to be like, maybe I need to find a new mountain. And this training, Terminator training, let's see how good I can go be at that, and try something else, because I think maybe you felt, maybe I did all I could do here, which it probably wasn't true, or maybe it was. Maybe in your, if it's in your mind and you think it's true in your mind, then it's fucking true in reality. Do you think that's kind of the way your psyche went?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I would say I've always just wanted to do things that would challenge me to the utmost, and I I don't want this to sound like going back to group is like I'm too good for it, or like it's
No,
below me or
I
anything.
understand. Like I understand. Like, it's, there's a fucking, we're talking about shit that most people in the regular, or you can't even imagine until you get there and then you see it and you're like, because it's never enough. It is never enough. Getting selected was never not enough. Passing the course was not enough. Getting to a team, being good on a team is not enough. Then you go to all these fucking schools. Then you learn about all these other fucking units that now are open to you and all this other cool shit you can do. And you get there, it's not enough. And we fail to even stop and look around and appreciate what we're doing while we're doing it. Almost everybody that's come on the show has said, no, I didn't look around one time because I was just trying to get to a place that I was never going to get to. I was trying to achieve some happiness that was never there. And
100%.
unfortunately, we only realize that after we're out. We're like, man, I did some cool shit. I
Yeah,
fucking, and now that stress of being around all these high performers is gone. And it's like, oh, it's up to me. I'm the only person here compared to, so let's enjoy it and do these things. So that's okay. I understand. And if people that are listening, they don't understand, well, then they don't have a perspective, and maybe they'll get there later in life. I was going to say, something else, but then they'll figure it out. If they'll figure it out later, and if they don't, then that's fine too. That's their perspective. But no, I understand exactly what you're trying to say.
yeah. I think I'm just wired a certain way to where no matter what, always want to chase something that's a little bit beyond my current comfort zone, if you will. Like, oh, that looks like it might challenge the hell out of me. Let me go try and do that. So, when the what I thought was the top of the mountain, like you said, was kind of taken away from me, or not taken away from me, but I allowed that to slip through by lack of performance. I went back to a little bit lower ledge, like, the last ledge on Everest before you get to the top, and hung out there for a while. But like you said, it's hard to realize while you're in it, like, oh, that was still pretty good, and I should give myself a little bit of credit for it. That being said, like, I really lucked out and went to an amazing team at third group, and I really enjoyed that, and I'm still really good friends with a lot of the guys on my team while I was there. But at the same time, I'm like, what else can challenge me? Guess what? It may not be something in the Army. It may be something outside the Army. And so that's, even though that's not, I hadn't thought of it the way that you put it, I would say you're pretty much dead on accurate, where I found another challenge and another risk and another thing that the outputs, or the outputs that I get from it, depend on my inputs, like what I do and how I show up every day. So yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. Is I just wanted to go and challenge myself at something different. Just kind of ran out of things to do in the Army, or options in the Army, and so figured I'd go and test my mettle at something else.
Yeah. You just got out on the front side of the hill, right? Like, because it's going to end. Like, you're still, there's a couple things afterwards, but your team life at that point, I mean, if you're saying you could have made 8 in a year, your team life was down to 2.5 years. Time is ticking anyway until you're done being on a team, unless you're like make the sacrifice to go warrant or commit or whatever. And there's some wild decisions you can make, but those are very, you know, those decisions are tough to make when you're at the 15-year mark, or 16-year even. But so you're on the front, like guys choose to go to the rest of the way, and guys choose to get out on the front side and see what they can make of. That's totally fine. There's nothing fucking wrong with
100%.
that,
I agree.
right? And everybody, and I tell people, like, you know, at the end of the day, or the end of your life, you're the only person inside your head that has to live your life. Don't get hung up on what other people think for your career or think for your health. Like, people like this, oh, they're afraid to get their hormones checked or something. Listen, fuck that. That person
Yeah.
doesn't have to feel like shit with you. That they don't have to. They're off doing their own life. They're not feeling depressed or lagging or something like that. Take care of yourself, because at the end of the day, you're the only person that's going to be miserable in that situation, or unhealthy, or on the flip side of it, that is going to feel great or feel healthy. And that person's not going to be there for you in either one of those scenarios. So take care of yourself, that make the decision that's best for you, that you can be happy with when you're an old man.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
think a lot of people do, SF or not. I think a lot of people do make decisions based on how they think other people are going to react or perceive it. And I try to remind myself, because sometimes I fall into these patterns. And I also try to remind other people, like, most other people, unless they're your immediate, really good friend or family or spouse or something like that, most people do not care about anything other than themselves. And even if you do something that upsets them for whatever reason, chances are they're probably going to forget about it in the next 2 minutes. Or if they remember it and you still decide to do it anyway, next time you see them, you're going to be up here. They're still going to be down there riding their little misery wheel, playing the victim, woe is me. So it's definitely
or
easier said than done, but
or get yourself to a point where you can help them. you know
right. Yeah.
Fix yourself up, get yourself so good that now you can reach back down and help them get out of where they're at. Because that's fucking way more gratifying than saying, "Oh, I succeeded and that person failed." No, help them out too. Try your best to rise out of it. So I brought up, like, being happy when you're an old man, right? So what is the goal for Terminator Training? What is the end state, or is it now? Have you gotten to a point where you're like, it's a fucking journey? I'm just on the ride.
Very good question. A little bit of both. I've never really been a 5 year out, 10 year out type goal guy. I know, like, that's kind of a no in the business world, but I just kind of think a little bit more short term, and I take opportunities as they come based on, what's been happening. Right now, we're in the process of scaling. And I say we're because my wife is actually coming to work with me 100% full time. So she just put her 30-day notice in. I can say this out loud now that her entire staff knows that she's leaving. Not that they would listen to, I said it on my podcast too. And she's like,
This
I'm
will be
like,
a while till this gets
there's no
posted,
way.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
they're not listening to this, but she's going to start work with me about a month from now. And she essentially is really good at all the things that I suck at and hate. So everything that has to do with marketing, finances, making things look nice, finding new opportunities that I would really never think of. I really like to coach. I really like to make content. I really like to train and, talk to people about how to be better people, or whether it's fitness or any other aspect of life. I do not like all the back end stuff. And I don't really have like a computer slash technological mind like she does. And she loves that stuff. She's got her MBA. She's always worked in marketing. So we're to a point right now where I would either have to hire someone like her to come and do the same thing, or she's going to take a leap and quit her job to come work with me. So that is the next scaling that we're going to be doing. I occasionally bring on some freelance work just for like behind the scenes editing and things like that. But I've been pretty much doing it myself for quite a long time. My wife does help me behind the scenes as along with working a full-time job, but there's only just so much she can do with her bandwidth. And it'll be great to have a lot of things taken off my plate so that I can kind of like focus on, working on the business rather than always working in the business, which as a coach, you have to work in the business. I can't stand when people say like never work in the business. If you're a coach, you have to work in the business. Like that is literally like your main job. But it's also nice to kind of work on other projects for future benefit or future opportunities. So that's kind of what we're doing right now. As far as long term, I really don't know. I definitely want to be able to help more people. So one of the things I want to consider doing, and I'm kind of in the works for it, is creating more of a group coaching opportunity. So right now I just do one-on-one, and I have a training team where I have a lot of guys following like my Train Heroic program, but like that's very low touch point. Like it's not really coaching. They're just following a program that I update every week. So it's not mentorship. There's a chat feature on it and they ask questions and things like that, but it's not like formal actually getting together and, helping mentor guys, the next generation. And I can only help so many people one-on-one. So my goal is to be able to help more people because I have to turn a lot of people down. I just have to. And I have to be very selective with who I bring on. And I've gone to where I've had way more clients than I can handle before. And it's not good for me, nor is it good for the guys I'm working with, because it's just like I'm spread thin. So right now I'm kind of working on, of course, bringing the wife on, and she's going to help me with this too. But we're going to try and make it so we have an opportunity to help more people. It'll be a little lower ticket, a little bit lower one-on-one touch point, of course, but I'll have to turn less people down. And I really am just out there. The reason I'm doing this is to try and help guys make the most out of their fitness and give themselves the best opportunity to succeed at selection. Or, some of my clients aren't prepping for selection. They're SWAT guys or firefighters or just guys that want to feel good and perform well and not continue running themselves into the ground like I used to do before I knew any better. So that's kind of the goal long term. Who knows? But I really don't see myself stopping anytime soon. And I really enjoy, I wake up every day super motivated and excited to get after it. And one of my hobbies is to work. I know that's not everyone's case, but like I would be once in a while take a day off, but honestly, it's kind of random. Like I'll decide randomly to take a day off if I feel a little burnt out or if I feel like my output is lacking. But I probably have taken in the last 4 years or so since I started this on the side. This is including military days of work plus business days of work, including after I got out. I've probably taken 3 or 4 days off, like Christmas, maybe my birthday. And I'm not saying that to like boast. I just really enjoy what I'm doing. And I like seeing the fruits of my labor kind of like pay off. I like when a guy hits me up and says, "Hey, coach, I got selected," or "Hey, coach, I passed this, this, and this," or really anything. Or even guys that I don't work with who hit me up with a DM like, "Hey, man, thanks for that advice that you gave a couple episodes ago. I just got selected, or I just crushed my ACFT, or I just got picked up or I got a Ranger tab, whatever. It's really rewarding. So I would love to continue doing that for as long as I possibly can. At which scale, who knows? But that's kind of the viewpoint going forward.
Well, different side of things, but you're motivating me because I'll see your stuff and I'm like, okay, I gotta work on something here. I gotta get, I gotta see you doing different stuff, you're talking to your phone and things like that. And I'm just starting out. So some of the stuff that I'm watching a few people, you're one of them. And I'm like, okay, because I got my new thing. I'm going to refocus on the fitness in June, right? Because I've kind of got the podcast not fucking squared away, but I got it where I want to, and I've been watching stuff like, okay, I gotta refocus here. So a couple things. So you're, I would say you're motivating people then in other ways than just with your coaching and your um, training programs and things like that. So I applaud
Thanks,
you
man.
there.
It's funny
I
you
think that's
say. It's funny you say talking to your phone because that was something I would have never expected myself to ever do. And I started to just for a little like tip for you and whoever else is listening. You're always going to hate the sound of your voice. You're always going to hate the way you yeah, we're just critical of ourselves. But if you keep that information in and you never get it out, like someone can benefit from it. And even if it doesn't get thousands of likes or tons of engagement or whatever, there's a chance that, maybe 2 or 3 people will use that information to better themselves. And once you start to do it, the way I started getting into it was I would do Instagram Q&As and I would just answer like voice with my basically videotape myself answering a question. And then I started to do longer videos where I would actually put it on as posts. And then I would put some stuff on YouTube and things like that. Just anytime an idea comes to my mind, or if I've had a question recently come up a lot of different times, then I just assume that more people want to hear about it. So I'll be like, hey, why not? I'll film myself talking, even if I look like a weirdo. No one really cares.
nobody gives a shit. It's more common now these days. But the story I tagged you in last night. That's me, like train like coach version of me is like, okay, we got to get better at talking to the phone. What can we
Dig it.
do? So I started that
Yeah.
4 days ago. What did I get done today? I got a minute to get in what I got done today and what I got up. So every night now at 9ish o'clock, I put up my story of what I got done and what I got coming up tomorrow and stuff like that. So even after 4 of them, I'm like, yeah, this is a little bit easier. And
It
I
gets
do
easier.
some,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah. So, but that's like, you gotta train. You gotta, just like those hand release push-ups or just like running, there's only really one way to get better at it.
Reps.
So
Yep.
fucking reps, repetitions, man. All right. I got 5 questions and then I got a bonus question here for you and then I'll cut you loose.
Let's do it.
What is your response to thank you for your service?
I usually honestly just say, oh, thank you. I don't like to say you're welcome, or I know the person usually means well, so I don't want to like make them feel like I feel like I don't need to be thanked for my service. I think we kind of all feel that way, or at least most people do. Maybe not everyone in the army, but a lot of like SF guys or soft guys. So usually I just thank them for saying it and try not to talk anymore about it. But I don't say like you're welcome, or I don't say like, oh no, I didn't do anything or anything like that, because they're saying it to be nice typically, and I feel like I don't want to shoot them down or bring them down when they say something. So it's usually just thank you.
What's the one characteristic that sets operators apart from the conventional forces?
I would say the fact that they have very, very high agency, and agency is basically the acceptance and the understanding that you are capable of basically writing the narrative or the story of what's going to happen next. So it's the thought process that you can make things happen, not things happen to you. Almost like the opposite of just being a victim of things. And I'm not saying like conventional is a bunch of victims or anything like that, but I think one
It's a
thing that
hot take right there.
right. I think one thing that really sets soft in general apart is just the fact that they have so many times they've proven to themselves that if they put their mind to something, they can make it happen. And if they don't make it happen the first time, they try something again. or a different route, or they use some sort of different strategy, or they bring someone else on board to kind of help them out. So really high agency is probably one of the main factors. I made a post about this the other day too, and agency was the top one. And that was honestly a term that I recently heard about. Like I honestly didn't really know what agency was that all that well until pretty recently, but I think it's a huge one.
What is the one moment of your career that you wish you could go back and relive or redo, and it wouldn't change where you are now?
Ooh, wouldn't change where I am now. I was going to say probably that shoot house at OTC, but wouldn't change where I am now. I would say I would go and probably redo my first time through Florida phase. I unfortunately like was very very close to passing this mission, but I fell short on a time hack. I was the platoon sergeant for one of the swamp missions, and you have to, by the time you get to the boats, all the way till you get your entire squad or your entire platoon into the boat, there's a certain time hack. And I remember I think it was like 16 seconds off. And that's the only reason. The guy literally said, you had a really good patrol, but that time hack is go or no go. And so we're going to have to give you no go for that. And I had another patrol that was a complete nightmare, but that one was really, really close. And although, yeah, it was just kind of a blip in the radar. And I don't think that it's a bad thing to fail Ranger School or to recycle Ranger School at all. The circumstances were I would have graduated with that class and right before Christmas break. And so I would have had Christmas break and then I would have gone back to group. Instead, had to stay for another 10 days in Florida and then went home for Christmas break and then had to come back for Florida after Christmas break. And that was a really brutal a little over a month time frame.
Oof, that
Yeah.
sounds fucking painful.
Yeah, it was awful.
But you got your tab.
Yep.
I don't fucking have one. Never got to go. So good for you, man. What is the best piece of advice that you received during your career?
Probably not to be the gray man. I know in a lot of circles and thought patterns, a lot of people think that being the gray man is a great way to kind of just fly under the radar. You don't do anything super remarkable, whether negative or positive. And I think that being the gray man, if that's your goal, if your goal is to be the gray man, really in anything, like you are going to just kind of stay in your comfort zone the entire time. And whether you're going through a selection process or a pipeline or doing anything on the civilian side, if you stand out for positive reasons, I don't understand how that could be better than being the gray man. So I think settling for being a gray man is just kind of almost a cop out. You're taking the easy way out, even though it may work. You'll still know that you had more to give, that you could have done better, even if no one else knows that you had a lot more in the tank. You still will, and that's not something that I am willing to live with. Is just kind of doing enough to get by. I always want to at least put my best foot forward and try as hard as I possibly can, really, with anything. So I think it was my first team sergeant that said, fuck being the gray man. That is terrible advice. If you're going to stand out for positive reasons, and you'll be a lot more successful that way.
Yeah. Uh, the opposite of that was my best advice I ever got. At my first unit, some little throwaway comment, "Oh, you don't want to stand out here," and I was like, "Fuck yes, I do. Like, I gotta get the fuck out of here." And
Yeah.
then I'm just gas all the way
Yeah.
through to get in my brain and shit like that. I have changed it though. Like, if mine is, it's know when to stand out and know when to not. Like, because there's a social aspect of things too. Like, if you know you say, standing out for positive reasons. If there are other people involved, and this ratchets up the more higher level of unit you get to, and you got to be a part of a team and stuff like that. Where if you're standing out but shining your team in a negative light, that isn't positively a negative
For
and things
sure.
like that. So,
Yeah.
but
Always context.
Terry Wilson said that, about the gray area. Know when to use the gray area correctly, and things like that. Don't always use it just because you don't know how to fucking plan and things like that. So, but Neither here nor there. All right, man. What were you afraid of then, and what are you afraid of now?
Afraid of then, as in like before I joined.
Oh, during your career, and now what are you afraid of?
During my career, honestly, I was always afraid of being like other, honestly, like other people thinking that I'm incompetent, almost like imposter syndrome, like not being able to hold my own at whatever it was, whether it was on the range, gun handling, CQB, getting into a stack in the air, like a free fall stack, things like that. I just never wanted to be that guy that failed. And of course, failed plenty of times. And that was kind of an irrational fear and something that I'm not afraid of anymore. Honestly, now I'm kind of afraid of not not challenging myself enough to potentially fail sometimes, because that's how you get better. That's how you learn. And I have to remind myself all the time that if I go out there and fail, that means I'm pushing myself outside of my comfort zone. Even if I do something foolish, or one person or two people think like, oh, this guy's an idiot, whatever it is. If I'm never kind of testing that limit and pushing that boundary, then how will I ever know what I'm actually capable of? So I would say I fear just hanging out in my comfort zone and chilling in the mediocrity crew for the rest of my life, knowing that I could have done more.
All right, man. Since you're in the fitness industry, bonus question:
Let's
you can
do
only
it.
do you can only do 7 exercises or lifts for the rest of your life. What are they?
All right. Let's go. All right. So I'm going to break it down by like body part just so I don't forget an entire body part. But we'll start with upper body push. We'll go with a Nautilus machine press. I have a Nautilus machine at my gym, and it's by far the best flat press. It's a seated Nautilus machine press, and it's amazing. So that would be my chest exercise. Back would probably be a bent over dumbbell or barbell row, only because I would get a little bit of erector involvement, like spinal erector involvement, as opposed to doing a chest supported row, and it works the lats and it works the upper back. So it's like kind of an all for one. For arms, I would say probably a underhand grip pull down. That's kind of cheating because it's more of a lat exercise, but it's also going to grow the biceps, and might as well include some more back. And then for triceps, I would probably do a dip. Lower body, what's that for? So lower body, I would do a belt squat for quads. I would do a seated leg curl, lean forward for hamstrings, and a deadlift, only because I really love the deadlift and I'm built really well for it. And it's one of the lifts I still do that maybe I don't really need to be doing super heavy, but I still enjoy it. So, and
Yeah,
I'm leaving out the calves too. And I have genetically very skinny calves, but oh well.
be all right. Some people got them, some people don't. Last one is I saw your deadlifts. I'm like, man, I got 60 pounds on this motherfucker, and he's deadlifting as much as me. God
It's my
damn
only claim to
bull,
fame though. It's my only lift.
damn bullshit. All right, Kevin, how can people find you on the socials if they so choose?
Yeah. So Instagram is Terminator underscore training. YouTube is Terminator Training Method. And those are my podcast is Terminator Training Show. That can be found on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Those are probably the best places to find me, or you can go to the website, terminatortraining.com.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate you coming on. You got anything for me?
No, Nick, I appreciate you, man.
I appreciate you coming on. We'll do it again sometime. Well,
Absolutely. All for it.
bye, bye, everybody.